Chapter 742. Count Namuka left, just like how he came, so quietly. Apart from the extinguished candles on the ground, there was not a single trace left behind. It was as if the magma and souls from before were illusions that had never truly existed. Phew. Looking at the pitch-black surroundings, Casimir finally heaved a sigh of relief and gently wiped the sweat off his forehead. It couldn't be helped. No one would feel relaxed when conversing with a great devil with the title of nobility, especially when he had to hide the fact that he had lost the orb of hell. Thus, even though they had only talked for less than 10 minutes, he felt mentally and physically exhausted. Suddenly, the tightly shut door creaked, and a beautiful figure entered. Her eyes were like the stars in the night sky, bright and enchanting. It was the lustful demon who had been waiting outside all this time. This beautiful creature walked forward with light and graceful steps, smiling as she asked, "How is it? Does the great Count Namuku agree to our plan?" Casimir glanced at her warily, then nodded and replied, "Yes, Master believes that we should join this dangerous game and not choose to run away. Now, I want to know how the Underground Guild is doing. When can they provide a rank 5 wizard? Also, we have to hurry and find that little thief Portia. Without the Orb of Hell, we can't truly open the planar passage, let alone allow Master's projection to descend." It was clear that although the two belonged to the Infernal faction and even had a very close cooperative relationship, they were wary of each other and didn't trust each other at all. The lustful demon shrugged nonchalantly. "Don't worry, the Underground Guild has already sent out an invitation. I believe that someone will take the initiative to contact us soon." Just as she finished speaking, a ball of white mist entered through the crack in the door, quickly turning into a solid body. It was Giles Chundra who had appeared in the underground tomb not long ago. He first sized up the other two people in the room through the dark vision unique to vampires, then placed a hand on his chest and bowed elegantly. "I'm very happy to meet you on such a beautiful night. Let me introduce myself. I'm Giles Chundra, and I'm here to discuss the details of our cooperation." "Vampire?" The lustful demon immediately saw through the other party's identity and asked with narrowed eyes. After all, as long as one was not a fool, one would be able to sense the negative energy in the air. Not long after Gills entered the room, the temperature dropped by at least 2 to 3 degrees. Even ordinary people could more or less perceive it. For a mid-level devil, if he couldn't even do this, he would have long been eliminated in the cruel promotion process. That's right. As you can see, I'm a vampire, and I'm from the noble Zemni family. We might not be famous in the south for now, but in the north, almost everyone knows about the legend of our family, especially the intelligence organization, Clown's Mask. As long as you pay, you could buy all the information you want." After saying that, a trace of pride appeared on Gil's face, as if he was proud of his family's huge power. Of course, he had enough reason to be proud. Clown's Mask could be said to be a household name in the northern kingdoms. From the king to the gang members, they were all loyal customers. Even the goddess of dawn, who hated undead creatures the most, did not dare to act rashly. Relying on the wealth obtained from selling intelligence, the Zemni family spent hundreds of years to create a network of interests. They would not attack ordinary people at will. Instead, they would pay to keep some human slaves and obtain enough fresh blood. It was this relatively gentle method that allowed them to quickly gain the recognition of the evil faction's nobles. Some nobles were even unwilling to die and took the initiative to request to be turned into vampires so that they could continue to enjoy everything. Over time, even ordinary people began to acknowledge the existence of the Zemni family. This was especially so for the towns and villages around the Nightsong Fortress. They had already seen the Zemni family as their protectors. Whether it was bandits who wanted to rob or mercenaries who liked to cause trouble, once they violated the rules set by the Zemni family, they would immediately have their blood sucked dry and be hung on the city walls as an example to the public. From a certain perspective, this vampire family had leaped from a low-level of hiding to a powerful force that could participate in politics and decide the situation of a large area. Unfortunately, Casimir had never been to the north, so he had no respect for the Zemni family. Out of courtesy, he bowed slightly and greeted with a slightly doubtful tone. "Hello, guest from the Zempney family. If I didn't hear wrongly, you seem to have mentioned cooperation? Could it be that the Underground Guild contacted a mage for us?" "No, they initially contacted my servant, Cecil. But after seeing this invitation, I felt that this matter was very interesting, so I decided to join him personally. As you can see, not only am I a vampire noble, but I am also a level 11 necromancer. Cecil would need half a month to complete the ritual, but I only need 7 days. I believe you won't reject me, right?" The corners of Gil's mouth curled up slightly. His 2 scarlet eyes shot out a frightening, evil light. He didn't hide his strength at all, attempting to gain more authority. The lustful demon, who was proficient in all sorts of schemes, immediately saw through Gil's intentions. She spread her wings without backing down and asked with a fake smile, I ask why you want to join this plan? More specifically, what ulterior motives do you have?" "There's no such thing as unconditional love in this world, and there's no such thing as unconditional hatred. I don't believe that a vampire would be so kind as to provide free help. Motives? My motives are simple, and that is to seize the Mage Tower under this city. Apart from that, I'll listen to you. What do you think? My request isn't too much, is it?" Gills had already expected this question, so he spoke openly. "Mage Tower?" A peculiar glint flashed in Casimir's eyes. He then nodded lightly. "I see. I'm not interested in that place. It's yours." Hearing this, an unhealthy blush appeared on Gil's pale face. At the same time, he extended his right hand and said, "With this, we have reached an agreement. Happy cooperation." "Happy cooperation." Casimir extended his right hand and shook Gil's cold, pale fingers. Chapter 743. The next morning, the sun rose from the horizon as usual. The restless and chaotic night of Valen City had finally passed, and the worried residents welcomed a brand new day. In the Wizard Tower, 500 meters below the city center, Angus was leading all the acolytes and wizards in building the interplanar teleportation gate in full swing. In just a few hours, the steel and stone of the main building had been completed. The next step was to embed countless priceless rare materials, gems, and magical metals in specific locations to form a massive magic circuit. When the resonance of energy exceeded a certain frequency, the passage to the fire elemental plane would be forcefully torn apart. Due to the ancient magic civilization's exploration, invasion, and migration of countless planes, the teleportation technology left behind was extremely advanced. Even acolytes who hadn't become true wizards knew how to create a teleportation gate. Thus, the entire scene appeared to be in order, and everyone was focused on their work. It must be known that participating in such a complicated and huge task was a rare opportunity for every apprentice, and even for mages. Not only could they apply what they had learned and accumulate rich hands-on experience, but they could also improve their perception and understanding of energy and the universe. Perhaps after the teleportation gate was completed, a small portion of the acolyte strength would increase by leaps and bounds in the next few months to a year, crossing the threshold of a rank 1 wizard. This was also why many wizards were willing to sign harsh conditions to join a wizard tower and become one of its members. Only a wizard tower could provide them with sufficient resources to participate in large-scale magic experiments, or to construct certain expensive and wondrous items. Looking at the 3-meter-tall, 1.5-meter-wide rectangular gate in front of him, Angus let out a sigh of relief and muttered to himself, "At the current speed, it'll be completed by tomorrow night at the latest. Then he'll be checking and debugging. Time is of the essence. I hope there won't be any mistakes when the time comes." Just as he was considering whether to report the progress to Andre, a female acolyte no older than 20 ran over in small steps, panting as she shouted at the bald wizard, "Master, we just received a teleportation request. If I'm not wrong, the other party should be the merchant in charge of supplying the tower, Willie Galt. In addition, he has 8 children with him." "Oh, I didn't expect them to come so early. How about this? approve the teleportation and bring them directly to the central control room to meet the Tower Master. Angus waved his hand lightly, indicating for the female apprentice to leave. Even though he didn't know what kind of secret agreement Andre and Willie Galt had, as a smart person, he knew what questions to ask and when to remain silent. Otherwise, he would be killed by his endless curiosity sooner or later. Understood. The female apprentice bowed slightly, turned around, and disappeared into the dim corridor. At the same time, Willie Galt, who was anxiously waiting outside the Mage Tower, kept pacing back and forth. His two eyes alternated between his son and daughter who were at a loss of what to do and the female apprentice who was sitting in the same spot and reading a book attentively. His heart was filled with anxiety and uneasiness. This female apprentice was none other than Jennifer, who had just entered the Magic Palace. In fact, compared to soaking in a library and absorbing endless knowledge to her heart's content, she didn't want to accept the job of being in charge of transporting people. But unfortunately, at the moment, all the mages and apprentices were busy building the teleportation door, and she was still a complete newbie. She couldn't be of any help at all, so she was forced to be in charge of the only teleportation point in the city that connected to the outside world. Of course, in exchange, she could study and guard at the same time. She would work 8 hours a day, and the rest of the time was free for her to use. Just as the temperature was getting higher and higher, and was about to break through the 30-degree mark, a 7-year-old little girl touched her stomach and carefully raised her head. Father, I'm hungry." She was wearing a clean white dress today, and her golden hair was like a waterfall that draped over her shoulders. She looked like an adorable angel, and anyone who saw her couldn't help but want to hug her and dote on her. However, Willie Galt was extremely irritated at this moment. He immediately glared at his daughter and scolded in a low voice, "Shut up. Stand there obediently. If you don't pass the test later, then you will starve for the rest of the day." Yes. The girl was so scared that she shuddered. She quickly lowered her head and didn't say a word. Her two big, lively eyes were covered with a layer of mist in just a few seconds. Soon, tears flowed down her cheeks and dripped down. Because of her father's prestige, she didn't dare to make a sound at all. She could only silently pour out her grievances in the depths of her heart. In fact, the little girl wasn't the only one who was hungry. Every child in the scene actually didn't have breakfast before they were chased by Willie Galt to the carriage. They came here in a grandiose manner to prepare for the Mage Apprentice test. It couldn't be helped. This powerful merchant was too obsessed with the power of magic, not to mention letting his children starve. If killing 7 of them could guarantee that the last one would become a mage, he would do it without hesitation. The people of Oraire had a completely different value when it came to the treatment of their descendants. They saw their children as the continuation of the will of their elders and an indispensable tool for the inheritance of the family. Before the elders died, they didn't even deserve to have independent thoughts or anything. They had to strictly abide by all the rules, or they would be severely punished. Of course, if they didn't want to be bound by such restrictions, then they could announce that they were leaving the family when they reached adulthood. They could give up the luxurious life and announce in public that they were giving up the right to inherit the family. They could take a sword and create their own legend. However, the consequences of doing so were usually not very good. They would either end up in a situation where they couldn't even fill their stomachs, or they would die in a fierce battle. Generally speaking, very few noble children were willing to give up everything that was within their reach, so they didn't dare to go against the will of their elders. Just when the little ones were about to reach the limit of their patience, Jennifer suddenly put down the book in her hand and listened attentively, as if she was communicating with someone. After a minute, she slowly stood up and said to Willie Galt, "Mr. Merchant, Master Angus has approved the teleportation. Please come closer to the children. I will bring you to see the Tower Master now." Chapter 744. It was common knowledge that the principle of teleportation was to flatten an object and send it through a spatial rift in a flat state, thereby shortening the distance to only a few steps or even a dozen steps. Generally speaking, during the process of teleportation, one's body and brain would experience a severe discomfort, especially the intense dizziness that would cause one to feel like dying. Wasn't this the 8 little ones that had just appeared in the teleportation portal, and their father, Willie Galt, were all lying on the ground and retching? Some of the younger ones even couldn't help but cry. Fortunately, the merchant had the foresight to not let the children eat anything. Otherwise, they would have vomited all over the place. It couldn't be helped. Compared to the sorcerers, ordinary people simply couldn't withstand the high-energy rays that were exposed to the spatial rift. That was why the reaction was particularly strong. Their bodies were so weak that there was even a possibility of sudden death. Jennifer had already accumulated a small amount of mana through meditation, so she was slightly better off. Her face only looked a little pale, but after half a minute, she recovered a little bit of color. She glanced at the children with pity, and then said in an emotionless voice, "I'll give you 1 minute to adjust. After 1 minute, follow me to the central control room. Remember, no matter what you see along the way, don't stop and don't touch anything. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. This is the place where the sorcerers conduct their research and experiments. Every corner of this place may be set up with terrifying magical traps. One wrong step could lead to terrible consequences, and in the worst-case scenario, death." In order to frighten these curious little ones, Jennifer deliberately exaggerated. Otherwise, she wouldn't have the confidence to keep an eye on these 8 naughty little monkeys, even though they looked quite cute. After all, as a rich man with a net worth of millions of gold coins, Willie Galt's wives and concubines were naturally young and beautiful. In addition, he himself wasn't ugly, so his children's genes had been greatly improved. At the very least, they were flawless in terms of appearance. As for their physical fitness and intelligence, they would have to wait until the end of the test to know. Before the little ones could say anything, the slightly fat merchant got up from the ground and took a few deep breaths. He immediately solemnly promised, "Please don't worry. I'll take good care of them. I won't cause any trouble to the Magus Tower." In fact, with his wealth and status, there was no need for him to be so kind to an apprentice. However, considering that his son and daughter would be living in the Magus Tower for a long time, he had to try his best to be as friendly as possible. He didn't want to accidentally offend someone and cause trouble for his children in the future. "Thank you very much. Please come with me." Jennifer smiled and nodded. She then pushed the door open and led the way to the passageway outside. Willie Galt did not dare to be slow. He immediately ordered the little ones to stand up and follow closely behind. Along the way, he secretly observed the scene in the Wizard Tower. Whether it was the motionless giant magic statue or the torches on both sides of the corridor that had been cast with inextinguishable flames, he felt that this trip had not been in vain. Although he was known as the only supplier of the Magus' Tower, it was still his first time visiting the Magus' Tower. He was very interested in these scenes that only existed in stories. As for the 8 children, they were already attracted by all kinds of strange things, especially the Pico goblins that came out from the corners from time to time. Some of the girls couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. These palm-sized monsters were specially summoned to take care of the cleanliness of the Magus' Tower and eliminate any pests that might appear. They looked similar to humans and elves. They had a pair of transparent wings on their backs and could cast a few illusion spells. Moreover, they didn't eat much, so they were very popular among the Magus' Tower. However, the Pico goblins that worked in the Magus' Tower were already used to the humans coming and going. Therefore, they ignored the curious looks of the little ones and continued to clean up the Magus' Tower. Just like that, with surprise, curiosity, and fear, the group quickly passed through the stairs and corridors and finally arrived at the central control room on the top floor of the Magus' Tower. Jennifer raised her left hand and signaled for everyone to stop. She then said to the golem that was guarding the door, "The Tower Master's guests have arrived. Please inform him." "There's no need for that. Master has instructed that you can enter at any time." A ray of light flashed in the golem's gem-like eyes as it replied in a low, muffled voice. "All right, looks like we can save a lot of time." Jennifer shrugged and didn't waste any time talking to the rock that was standing in front of her. She reached out to push the door open. However, the moment her hand touched the door handle, she felt a sudden tremor in the depths of her heart. She didn't know why, but all the hair on her body stood up. She didn't dare to think too much. She subconsciously followed the judgment of her sixth sense and directly fell to the ground. There was no doubt that as a woman, especially a beautiful woman, suddenly falling to the ground immediately attracted everyone's attention. Just as Willie Galt opened his mouth and was about to ask something, a loud noise suddenly came from the other side of the door. Bang! An invisible force directly pierced through the hardwood door that was at least 10 centimeters thick and violently hit the hard granite wall, leaving a small white dent on it. Hiss! Seeing this scene, the merchant couldn't help but take a deep breath. His forehead was soaked in sweat in just a few seconds. He knew very well that if Jennifer didn't fall to the ground just now, she would have most likely been pierced through by the terrifying force and died on the spot. Danger! It was too dangerous. Willie Galt finally began to believe in the legends of the sorcerers. At the same time, he was even more determined to let his descendants master this power. Jennifer, who almost died, didn't immediately get up from the ground. Instead, she carefully searched the ground around her. Soon, she found a small piece of copper that was pressed out of shape. There seemed to be a small piece of lead wrapped in the copper. She was sure that it was this thing that pierced through the door. She was lucky that it didn't kill her. Just when everyone was a little confused, the door suddenly opened. A young man with an eye patch walked out from inside. It was Andre. However, he looked a little miserable. His face, hands, and neck were covered in black ash. For some reason, a large piece of his luxurious robe had been burned away. Furthermore, he was holding a strange-looking weapon in his hand. It seemed that this weapon was the cause of the accident just now. Of course, if it was someone from Earth, they would have recognized this strange weapon as the famous revolver. However, there were a lot of magic runes engraved on the body of the revolver. From time to time, it would flash with a golden light. Chapter 745. Aha! Sorry, I was just doing an experiment and there was an accident. Andre rubbed the dust off his nose and apologized awkwardly. In fact, he was trying to combine magic and technology to create a unique magic pistol in the world. But who would have thought that due to the high sensitivity of mercury fulminate, when he tried to add fire damage to the bullet, it immediately misfired and shot out along the mithril barrel. Its power was comparable to that of a sniper rifle. After all, Andre borrowed the power of the Mage Tower to permanently add a level 3 spell to the barrel, acceleration. So when the bullet accelerated in the barrel, it was not just a pure physical acceleration, but also a magical effect. The addition of the two was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, but it was a geometric increase. Just this point alone greatly increased the initial speed and power of the bullet. The penetration increased by 8 to 10 times, and the effective killing radius was more than 1 kilometer. As for the butt of the gun, it was also permanently enchanted with a level 1 spell, Preemptive Strike. Every time the trigger was pulled, it would trigger the effect of increasing the accuracy. Even someone who had never used a pistol before could use it to kill a rabbit within 50 to 100 meters. But Andre was obviously not satisfied with only 2 spells on the gun, so he thought about the bullets. He first tried to add strong acid to the bullets, and after testing, he found that it was feasible. After a bullet with strong acid was shot into a test subject, it could cause serious corrosion to the surrounding organs and muscles in 2 to 3 seconds. After observing this, his interest in research was completely aroused. Following that, he tried to add a series of tests such as sound waves, thunder and lightning, immobilization, blinding, positive energy, and so on. All of them were successful. Only adding cold and negative energy failed. The reason was simple. The bullet relied on the propelling force of the instant explosion to accelerate, so when cold energy was added, there was no way to ignite it. Negative energy was similar. Although the bullet could be shot out, when the nitrocellulose was ignited, the negative energy produced by the enchantment would disappear completely in the blink of an eye. High temperature and high heat flames were the nemesis of negative energy, so it was impossible to emit negative energy into the bullet. As for the final experiment, it was naturally to add fire damage. Similarly, he failed as well. It had to be said that when he held the revolver in his hand that was mainly made of mithril, Andre instantly felt like he was a magician in a movie. It was just that the cost of making it was a little expensive. Just the materials of the revolver itself cost at least 30,000 gold coins. Without any special steel, using mithril, which was known to never wear out, was the only choice, and the price of mithril, well, apart from the very rich, even the nobles might not be able to afford it. Apart from that, there was also the constant magic, the production of bullets, the refinement of mercury, and the nitrocellulose. Overall, the cost of the gun was around 80,000 gold coins. Each unenchanted bullet cost 10 gold coins, and the cost of the enchanted bullets was calculated according to the standard spell level. It could be said that this thing was a luxury item that was built with gold coins, and it used a lot of rare materials that were stored in many warehouses. If Gerald Jenkinson knew that someone was so wasteful, he would probably jump out of his coffin in anger. In fact, Aurare's level of technology was not low, especially its wonderful magic, which could replace countless machines. As long as one was willing to pay the price, they could definitely build a light modern army. The only drawback was that it was expensive to make. In terms of pure power, guns were not comparable to intermediate or advanced arcane spells. If one had the time, they might as well make a few more fireball magic staffs. The reason why Andre was willing to spend so much money on a revolver was that he wanted to see the effect of the combination of magic and technology, and also to get himself a convenient long-range weapon. Although a crossbow was good, it was too troublesome to load it, and it was far slower than pulling the trigger of a revolver. More importantly, no one in this world knew about guns, so it increased the success rate of a surprise attack. He believed that the next time someone launched an attack, it would definitely be a big surprise. I almost died, and you said it was an accident. Seeing that the danger had passed, Jennifer hurriedly got up from the ground and shook the dust off her clothes. She curled her lips in annoyance, but her eyes never left the revolver. She was very clear that everything that had happened was an accident. Although the process was a little frightening, the result was good. At least she was not injured, so she did not intend to pursue the matter. Andre, who knew that he was in the wrong, did not try to explain. He smiled bitterly and spread out his hands. "I'm sorry. You should know that when a mage is doing experiments, there are always all kinds of accidents. What happened just now is nothing at all. How about this? When you master your first level 0 arcane spell and become an official apprentice, I'll give you a magic item as a gift. How about that? All right, since you are so sincere, I'll forgive you, my dear teacher." Hearing that there was a gift, the corners of Jennifer's mouth rose slightly, and she immediately returned to her original smile. Ever since she was captured by Blackblade, she had not received a gift for many years. Moreover, it was a magic item, so she quickly put the matter of almost losing her life to the back of her mind. "Haha, thank you for your forgiveness. Don't worry, I'll definitely prepare a special gift for you. I guarantee that it will be unforgettable." After saying that, Andre rubbed his sore neck and shifted his gaze to the merchant. Willigalt, who had recovered from his shock, quickly took 2 steps forward, put one hand on his chest, and bowed deeply. "Good morning, master. As per your request, I've brought all my children from 5 to 14 years old. Please be sure to test their aptitude." Andre glanced at the trembling children and nodded slightly. "Very good. Wait here for a few minutes. I'll bring them inside for the apprentice test. Those who have the talent to become a mage can stay. As for the rest who have been eliminated, I'll also give you some suggestions." "Thank you very much. I have a small gift here. Please accept it." Willigalt carefully took out a wrinkled, inconspicuous cloth bag and handed it over with both hands. In order to have the opportunity to learn magic, he did not care about the cost. He even took out the treasure that he was most proud of. "This is..." Andre picked up the cloth bag, and 2 rays of light shot out from his eyes. He gently put his left hand into the bag, which was the size of his palm. He was so surprised that he could not close his mouth. After a few minutes, he muttered to himself, "A multi-dimensional bag. It's a multi-dimensional bag that's 10 cubic meters." Chapter 746. A dimensional bag, also known as a dimensional bag, was a special magical storage device. Based on the principle of teleportation, it was a simple and constant teleportation spell in the bag. The items put in the bag would be teleported to a half-plane close to the material world, and the half-plane would move with the bag. In other words, the seemingly inconspicuous bag was actually connected to a real space of 10 cubic meters or a small warehouse. It had no fixed shape, and as long as the total volume of the items put in did not exceed 10 cubic meters, there was a 100% chance that they could be stuffed in. In fact, in the book, Plane Exploration, the author had tried to describe a relationship between the world and the half-plane. In layman's terms, every complete material world always had countless independent dimensional spaces around it. It was a bit like a satellite orbiting a planet, but it was also a bit similar to the theory of parallel universes. In short, these spaces of different sizes and environments were called half-planes. Generally speaking, they were not connected to the material world. Unless the power of magic was used, ordinary people would not be able to enter and see the real world in their lifetime. During the most prosperous period of the ancient magic civilization, the archmages explored different dimensions and found thousands of half-planes of various sizes around the Oriire. Some of them were very large and had environments similar to the material world, so they were transformed into private bases one after another for dangerous experiments or as safe secret hiding places. As for those with bad environments or too small sizes, they were used as warehouses to store valuable items, and the dimensional bag was one of the most famous ones. However, with the destruction of the ancient magic civilization, the technology of making dimensional bags was completely lost. Later, with the blessing of the god of gods on the whole world, some of the dimensional bags with poor craftsmanship quickly lost their connection to the half-plane, leaving only a few of the best products in circulation in the hands of the rich and powerful. It could be said that if the dimensional bag of 10 cubic meters was taken out by the merchant and auctioned in a big city, it would immediately cause a bloody storm. Even an archmage like Boris would not be able to resist the temptation to snatch it. After all, although 10 cubic meters was not a large space, it was enough to store a lot of things, especially those special items that were small in size and dense in density. With it, there was no need to worry about the awkward situation of finding valuable spoils of war, but not being able to transport them away. Sensing the space on the other side of the bag, which was half the size of a standard container, Andre raised his head and stared into the merchant's eyes. With a serious expression, he asked, "Why? Why are you giving it to me? Don't use words like thanks. That's insulting my IQ, and it's insulting your own." As a cautious mage, he never minded using the most vicious thoughts to infer the actions of others. As the saying goes, one who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Who would give away a priceless treasure as a gift for no reason? Anyone who used their brains a little would know that something was amiss. It was just that some people were blinded by the huge benefits and eventually fell into the trap, unable to climb out. However, there was still a small number of people who were not blinded and were keenly aware of the existence of the trap. Obviously, Andre belonged to the latter. Although he really wanted to take the multi-dimensional bag for himself, his reason told him that he absolutely couldn't have any greedy thoughts before he figured out the cause and effect. Willie Galt looked very nervous. His eyes were flickering, and he didn't dare to look at Andre. However, he understood that running away wouldn't solve any problems. So after struggling for a few minutes, he sighed helplessly. "Sigh, all right, since you've already seen through the problem, then I have nothing to hide. As a matter of fact, it's a huge problem for me right now. It's a long story. If you want to know the details, I'm more than happy to stay behind after the test to talk about it. If that's the case, then I'll wait to hear your explanation." Saying that, Andre gave Jennifer a look. The latter immediately understood and led the merchant to the guest room. After watching the two disappear at the end of the corridor, he turned around and ordered the children who were waiting in a daze, "Don't just stand there. Follow me. Remember, without my permission, don't make a sound and don't even open your mouth to speak. Otherwise, you'll immediately lose your qualification." "Yes, yes." One of the oldest boys was so scared that he trembled. He hurriedly called his younger siblings into the room and closed the door behind him. Andre's test was very simple. He used a black cloth to cover the eyes of all the children in the room. Then he took off the blindfold on his left eye and used the mystical eye to read their attributes panel. If their intelligence was more than 12, they would be considered as having the potential of a mage. After all, these children were still underage. With the second development of their bodies and brains, they would at least have an intelligence of 14 to 15 by the age of 20. Perhaps they wouldn't be considered as geniuses, but they would be more than capable of becoming a true mage. After all, he didn't have the time to follow the ancient rules of the mages. Through mazes, illusions, mind detection, and other means, he didn't have the time to torture the children one by one until they were exhausted. He observed everyone's reaction when they were in despair, fear, and sadness, so that he could identify those who were worth nurturing and those who could only become poor test subjects. After a short 10 seconds, Andre quickly obtained the detailed information of the 8 children. He had to admit that the quality of Willie Galt's children was not bad, especially the 2 youngest girls and 1 boy. All of them had reached the standard of an apprentice. The remaining 5 had their own strengths in strength, physique, and agility. After strict training, it wouldn't be a problem for them to become warriors, thieves, and rangers. From the information obtained from the children, it was obvious that they had taken swordsmanship lessons or combat lessons. The oldest boy might have even killed someone before. Even after covering his eyes, he didn't panic like his younger siblings. Andre wasn't surprised at all by this result. This was because the Oleo continent had always been a very polarized social structure. The wealthy could live more luxurious lives than the billionaires on Earth, and their descendants could enjoy first-rate resources and education. As long as there were no accidents, they would grow up to be outstanding talents. On the other hand, the civilians were the exact opposite. They couldn't even fill their stomachs with 2 meals a day. They were in a state of malnutrition for a long time, not to mention receiving education. Imagine there were 2 newly born twins. One of them was abandoned in a remote mountain village since he was young. He didn't have enough clothes to cover his body and didn't have enough food to fill his stomach. The wisest person he met was the illiterate village chief. As for the other one, he lived in a big city with a good family environment. He received all kinds of elite education since he was 3 or 4 years old. When the 2 of them were together after they became adults, no one would think that they were twins. Even their physical attributes would be very different. Chapter 747. In his previous life, Andre had heard from a biologist that genes were like the hardware of a computer, determining the limits of a person's potential. Healthy diet and habits were like the operating system of a computer, determining how much potential a person could develop. Lastly, personality and education. They were similar to the large number of applications in a computer, determining how much a person could achieve. Obviously, even if a child from a poor family was born smart, they would not be able to get enough nutrition to develop good habits. Furthermore, they would not be exposed to a wide range of knowledge, so the result was obvious. No matter how good the talent hidden in their genes was, it would be useless. The so-called fair world has never existed. No matter if it was Orion or Earth, the only difference was the level of exploitation, but there was no difference in nature. Andre sighed at how lucky Willie Galt was to have so many outstanding children. He immediately put on the blindfold again and brought the 8 children who had no idea what was going on to the living room not far away. As soon as he opened the door, the anxious merchant jumped up from his chair and asked excitedly, "How is it? How many of them have the talent to become a mage?" "Congratulations. Your youngest son and 2 older daughters have reached the minimum requirement to become an apprentice. As for the rest, they have the potential to become other professions. Here are the detailed results of the test. Take a look at it yourself." Andre put down a piece of parchment that recorded the basic attributes and replied with a smile. "3. You're saying that 3 of my children can become mages?" Willie Galt could not believe his ears and exclaimed as he took the parchment. Andre was already used to the merchant's overly excited reaction and nodded calmly. "That's right. 3 of them can stay and learn magic, but I can't guarantee that they can become real mages. After all, the process of learning magic is always full of accidents, and more than half of the apprentices do not even live to the end of their apprenticeship. Also, I can only promise to give them all the conditions that a normal apprentice should have. As for whether they can calm down and gradually transform their knowledge into power, that will depend on their will. I understand. I understand all of this. That's great. This is awesome. Willie Galt's voice was trembling with excitement. He didn't have time to look at the contents of the sheepskin. Instead, he rushed to his youngest son's side and lifted him into the air. He laughed and said, "Piano, from today onwards, you are the sole heir to all my assets. Study magic well. No matter what you need, I will satisfy you." Really? The boy, who was not even 6 years old, could not believe that his father, who was usually strict and harsh, would say such words to him. Ha ha, of course it's true. You are the future master of the Galt family. The merchant clearly couldn't control his emotions as he laughed happily. He didn't notice the flash of jealousy, resentment, and greed in the eyes of the other children who were slightly older. As for the two Lolas who had also become acolytes and were even more talented than the boy, they were completely ignored. In the eyes of most people in Orire, daughters were all losers. Not only did they have to raise them for more than 10 years, but they also had to prepare a large amount of dowry. There was no need to waste too many resources on raising them. Perhaps if his sons were not talented, Willie Galt would treat his daughters better. But now complete and utter disregard. Andre, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, couldn't stand it anymore. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and then he deliberately coughed. Cough. All right. If you want to celebrate, wait until you go home. Now let's talk about the details of learning magic. First of all, acolytes must live in the wizard tower. During this period, they are not allowed to bring any personal belongings or servants. But considering that your 3 children are still young, I will allow them to go home for 2 days a month, the middle and the end of the month respectively. Secondly, acolytes need a lot of resources to study in the wizard tower, so it is necessary to collect tuition fees. For now, it will be set at 1,000 gold coins per month, including food and lodging, borrowing of basic knowledge books, and so on. In the future, it will be increased according to the needs, but there is no upper limit. Learning magic costs a lot of money, so you'd better be mentally prepared. According to my estimation, if your 3 children start from scratch and become a level 1 mage in the shortest time possible, it will cost at least a few 100,000 gold coins. And the more they learn, the more expensive it will be. Of course, if you feel that the burden is too heavy, you can give more resources to one of them. The other 2 can sign a subordinate contract with the wizard tower, and all the fees will be halved. But after they finish their studies, they must join our ranks. In other words, they must first be loyal to the wizard tower. Under the condition that they do not violate the wizard tower's principles, they will only be part of your family. Lastly, and most importantly, your children must abide by all the rules here 100%. No preferential treatment. Equal treatment. No problem. Everything will be according to your wishes. As for the subordinate contract, I will go back and think about it. I will give you an answer in 2 days. As a successful smuggler, Willie Galt never liked to drag his feet. At the same time, he also knew that he didn't have much choice. This was because he understood that it was not easy to train a mage. Otherwise, there would not be so few mages. The current conditions were good enough, and the rest was up to fate. Very good. Then we will talk about the apprentices here. Next, explain to me the origin of this thing, and what do you mean by big trouble? As he spoke, Andre took out a multi-dimensional bag from his waist and shook it lightly. His eyes suddenly became sharp. Willie Galt shuddered subconsciously. He immediately sighed with a bitter smile. Sigh? Speaking of which, this is really a bizarre and terrifying story. Since you've asked, I'll briefly tell you about it. But before that, can you send my son and daughter away? There are some things that I do not want them to know too early. Yes, Jennifer. Andre directly waved to the disciple sitting at the other table. Send them away from the wizard tower. Chapter 748. After watching his 8 children who were filled with joy, disappointment, jealousy, resentment, and other emotions leave the guest room, Willie Galt stroked the short beard on his chin and stared at the multidimensional bag on the table with an extremely strange and complicated look. He wanted to say something several times, but in the end, he did not say anything. The atmosphere suddenly became strange. "Is there something you can't tell me?" Andre tapped the table lightly and asked in a low voice. He could feel that the merchant seemed to be afraid of something. His palms were sweating nonstop, as if the multi-dimensional bag on the table was not an ordinary one, but a scourge. Willie Galt smiled bitterly and shook his head. No, it's just that I remembered something terrible. I'm sure you've heard of my history, right? Actually, this bag is part of the treasure. To be exact, it's a treasure buried in the deepest part of the treasure. It's not like the other gold and jewels that were casually thrown into the box. Instead, it's placed in an airtight, waterproof box. What's even more incredible is that ever since I got the multidimensional bag, I've been hearing strange voices and having strange dreams at night. They're like ghosts, always following me around. There were a few times when I wanted to secretly throw it away, but I don't know why, but it came back to me. As you can see, it's not an ordinary multidimensional bag. Especially recently, these dreams and ravings have become more and more frequent, as if they're urging me to do something. According to the descriptions of my servants and concubines, I've been doing some terrible things at certain times. For example, I suddenly got up in the middle of the night and killed a chicken, spilling blood everywhere. Another example is cutting my finger with a knife and drawing strange patterns on the wall. But afterward, I can't remember what I've done at all. It's like I'm sleepwalking. Anyway, I have a feeling that if I can't find a way to get out of this situation, I'm afraid I won't be able to live much longer. Maybe it was because he had accumulated too much pressure, or maybe it was because he was afraid of the strange situation that happened to him. The merchant could not stop talking once he started. He spilled out all the secrets hidden in the bottom of his heart in one go. As a native of the South, he had heard too many horror stories sung by bards. He knew how bad his situation was, otherwise he wouldn't be so obsessed with magic. Strange murmurs, sleepwalking, amnesia, blood, graffiti. It feels like some kind of consciousness is trying to transmit some kind of message. Andre frowned and began to think about the connection. After a few minutes, he raised his head and asked, "Can you tell me when this situation started? Was there any pattern to the outburst? How can you be sure that it's caused by the multi-dimensional bag?" "Actually, I've been having auditory hallucinations since the first night I got the bag, but I was too excited at the time to pay attention to it. Later, as the situation became more and more serious, I suddenly woke up and began to look for a solution. As for the pattern, it seemed to happen most of the time at night. To be exact, it was the night of the new moon. But now, it was so frequent that it would happen once every 3 days. It's even easier to confirm. Every time I secretly throw away the multidimensional bag, these symptoms will all disappear. Once it returns to my hands, all the strange things will happen again." After saying that, Willie Galt shuddered. His face was as pale as a sheet. What happened to him? Not to mention a normal person, even a professional would feel numb. Humans would usually be particularly respectful and fearful of things that they didn't understand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made up all kinds of strange ghost stories. After getting the information he needed, Andre immediately activated Arcane vision and searched the multi-dimensional bag from the inside to the outside. In the end, he didn't find anything wrong. There was no doubt that he couldn't find a reason just by looking at the surface. Other than the arcane light that should be there, there was only the occasional golden light that was reflected by the silk threads around the bag. However, this didn't stop Andre's curiosity. After thinking for a few minutes, he continued to ask, "Tell me more about the murmurs and the graffiti. What are the contents of the auditory hallucinations? Were the pictures drawn with blood?" Willie Galt closed his eyes for a few seconds and replied with a bitter smile, "I'm sorry. Although I can hear all kinds of murmurs, they are very vague, and every time I hear them, they will disappear from my memory. It's very strange. As for the pictures drawn with blood, they are even stranger. It seems to be a map that has never been seen before. If you want to take a look, I'll ask the servant to send a copy tomorrow. All right, I'll leave the multi-dimensional bag here for now. I'll see if I can find anything. You can go back now. Remember, send your son and daughter here in 2 days and give me a definite answer." After saying that, Andre raised his arm and made a please gesture. "Understood. Don't worry, I'll think about it as soon as possible." Willie Galt quickly stood up, bowed, and turned to leave. It was as if he couldn't wait to leave this place, to escape from the seemingly inconspicuous bag, as if there was a terrifying demon hiding inside. The merchant's panicked look made Andre feel a little funny. As a complete materialist, he might be in awe of powerful forces, but he would never be afraid of strange things. The only thing he wanted to do now was to uncover the mystery and find out what was causing all this trouble. As everyone knew, Orire was a world full of supernatural forces, but at the same time, it was also a world that hid countless secrets. Lost civilizations, disappeared races, incredible magical technology. In short, there were many unexplainable phenomena that often happened here. Some of them were easy to find the answer to, but there were also some that even the mages who pursued the truth couldn't explain. Just as Andre was thinking about where to start, the bag on the table suddenly floated into the air, and at the same time, he heard a hair-raising scream. "Go back. Return it. This multidimensional bag doesn't belong to you." Immediately. Now. The voice was so sharp that even the nerves in his brain felt a slight pain, and blood slowly flowed out from his eyes and nose. Obviously, this was not a normal scream, but a direct attack on the soul. If it was a normal person, it would instantly cause the brain to explode. Chapter 749. Who are you? Enduring the pain in his head, Andre opened his mouth and gasped for air. At the same time, he shouted loudly in his mind. He could feel an unknown force invading his consciousness, trying to control his thoughts and actions. "Human, I order you to give up resisting. Submit to my great will. I will grant you wealth, status, glory, and everything you desire." After realizing that the mental attack did not work, the ear-piercing voice did not stop. Instead, it kept increasing its control, and, at the same time, it used words to distract his attention, making it impossible for him to concentrate. Andre grabbed the table with both hands, his expression extremely ferocious. He grabbed the multidimensional bag floating in the air and roared, "Get out! Get out of my mind right now, or I will burn this bag." As the last word left his mouth, his arm quickly turned into a fire elemental form, and the scorching heat began to spread in the air. It would take at most a few seconds to destroy the magical protection surrounding the multidimensional bag. No, 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 stop right now. I will get out of your mind right now." Seeing that the entire hand was about to be completely transformed, the ear-piercing voice seemed to feel an unprecedented fear. In the blink of an eye, it stopped the mental invasion, and its tone was full of panic. Without a doubt, this multidimensional bag was very important to him, and he could not afford to lose it. "Cough, cough, cough. Speak. Who are you?" Taking advantage of the moment when the pain in his mind disappeared, Andre quickly coughed out the blood in his throat and wiped the blood from his nose. With his keen observation, he realized that the opponent seemed to value the multidimensional bag very much, so he directly wrapped it in a bright flame. With just a thought, he could turn this priceless treasure into ashes. Perhaps the threat was effective. The ear-piercing voice suddenly fell silent and did not make a sound for a long time. However, just because the enemy did not make a sound did not mean that Andre did not make a sound. After waiting patiently for a few minutes, he sneered and shook the multidimensional bag surrounded by flames and threatened softly, "Last warning. Answer my question immediately. Otherwise, after 10 seconds, it will be turned into ashes under the flames. At that time, no matter what tricks you have, it will be useless." Hee. No, you wouldn't do that. This is a valuable treasure. Based on my understanding of the greed of humans, you would never be willing to destroy such a precious magic item, especially when your life is not in danger. If his voice wasn't so shaky, it would have been very convincing. Really? It seems that you haven't seen a true human elite. Don't worry, I'll show you today. As he spoke, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly. He immediately controlled the flames to attack the burning cloth bag. In just a few seconds, there was a burnt smell. Fortunately, it was a magical item and was protected by an invisible force field. Otherwise, it would have turned into a pile of black ash. There was a saying that compared to empty words, actions were the only way to intimidate the enemy. Before he could completely set the multi-dimensional bag on fire, an ear-piercing voice sounded in exasperation. He could not help but curse loudly. "Damn it! Bastard! Lunatic! Stop! Stop immediately! I order you to stop. You are making an enemy of the Great Will. If I break free from this damned imprisonment, I will definitely tear you to pieces." Hearing the voice, Andre was not angry at all. Instead, he laughed happily. "Ha ha, buddy, you have a talent for comedy. You can find a small pub and do a talk show. You can earn a lot of money. Tear me to pieces? If you can do that, why are you still here talking nonsense? Wake up, I will tell you my rules now. First, tell me who you are and why you are trapped in the multi-dimensional bag. Second, why are you so insistent on staying by Willie Galt's side? Is there anything special about him? Third, you have been whispering in Willie Galt's ear and controlling the drawing he drew with his blood. What are you hiding? Remember, you only have one chance to answer each question. If I find out that you're lying, then this multi-dimensional bag will immediately be burned to ashes. This is not a threat, nor is it a threat. It is a simple fact. Of course, if you don't believe me, you can give it a try. But I don't think you have the courage to do so, do you? Without a doubt, Andre had grasped the enemy's weakness. He was sure that the multi-dimensional bag in his hand was the only channel that connected the ear-piercing voice to the outside world. As long as he firmly grasped it, then the other party would not be able to resist. Reality proved that his deduction was correct. The unknown voice did not dare to take any risks. In the blink of an eye, it completely retreated from his mind. At the same time, a small cloud of colorless, translucent smoke was spat out from the multidimensional bag. It gradually formed the appearance of a humanoid monster. Its eyes were milky white, without pupils. There were 4 tentacles near its mouth, and its head looked like an octopus. Its body was slender, thin, and soft as if it had no bones. Mind Flayer. As a knowledgeable mage, Andre recognized the scientific name of the monster in a short time. His eyes were full of caution. He could not believe that he had actually seen a living Mind Flayer. After all, this was a brain-eating monster that was known for its danger, coldness, and ferocity. It had a supernatural power called psychic ability. Although it was completely different from magic, it was equally strange and difficult to guard against. The mind control just now was one of them. Even a high-level professional would not have much ability to resist in front of the Mind Flayer. Usually, one would fall under the control of the mind control and become a slave under the control of the other party. It could be said that when facing the Mind Flayer, no matter how much one tried to guard against it, it would not be overboard. The palm-sized phantom of the Mind Flayer waved the tentacles near its mouth and directly spoke with its psychic ability. "Human, you win. I can answer all your questions, but there is one condition. You must help us escape from the imprisonment." Condition? Oomph. Andre narrowed his eyes and sneered. Then he mocked. "The condition is a deal when both parties are equal in strength. I want to know, what right do you have to negotiate with me? Knowledge, wealth, power, power. As long as you can think of it, we can give it to you. The Great Will is omnipotent." The Mind Flayer was an extremely rational creature, so it would not be angered by a mere sarcastic remark. Instead, it was very calm and began to use the greedy nature of humans to achieve its goal. Chapter 750. Unfortunately, your temptations have no effect on me. Now, you can either answer my question or watch me burn the bag. It's a very simple choice. You have 1 minute to consider. Andre wasn't moved at all as he calmly gave the final ultimatum. Wealth? How much wealth could a mere Mind Flayer have? Including the rare metals, gems, slaves, and so on, the total value wouldn't exceed a few million gold coins. Much of it was for their own use, and it would be good if they could take out a third of it. It probably couldn't even compare to the huge profits he made from selling salt. If they wanted money, all they had to do was find a few more deserted islands and expand the scale of the salt pans by a few times, completely monopolizing the salt trade in the south and surrounding areas. Not to mention a few million gold coins, even tens of millions wouldn't be a problem. Money had never been a problem for Andre. Even when he was a hunter in Lonely Mountain Town, he could easily get enough gold coins, not to mention now. Power? As the successor of the chairman of Linton City's Mage Association and the main culprit behind the turmoil and chaos in Valen City, how could Andre lack power? In fact, he was starting to get tired of hiding in the dark and plotting against his opponents. Thus, power had limited appeal to him. As for power and knowledge, they were what Andre desired the most. But the problem was that the Mind Flayer's knowledge and understanding in this area was completely different from humans. To be more precise, it was very difficult for mental abilities and magic to be compatible with each other. They belonged to two completely different power systems. The former belonged to idealism, strengthening one's power through continuous self-affirmation, finally reaching the realm where one was the universe, and the universe was one's self. One could turn the thoughts in one's mind into supernatural spells with a raise of one's hand. The latter was materialism through and through, summarizing experience through observation, and then generating theories and constructing spell models through experience. Thus, every new spell had to go through complicated and detailed research. Rather than saying that mages were a group of users of supernatural powers, it was more appropriate to say that they were a group of scientists who grasped supernatural powers. Without a doubt, if Andre, as a mage, was bewitched by the Mind Flayer's language, then the most likely outcome would be being driven mad by two extremely contradictory theories. It could be said that from the very beginning, the Mind Flayer had not shown the slightest bit of friendliness. From the very beginning, it had been trying to destroy the strong will to resist. Unfortunately, Andre wasn't a native, but a transmigrator with a completely different mindset and values. Even though power, wealth, strength, and knowledge were all things that most people in this world pursued, to him, life was the most important thing. The rest could only be ranked in order of importance. Only by living can there be a future. There was only hope if he was alive. Only by living could one obtain knowledge and power. Only by living can you change your fate. Nothing was more important than being alive. This was the truth that Andre had summed up in his two lives. If someone threatened his life, he would refuse without hesitation, no matter what the other party offered. The Mind Flayer was a terrifying monster that could sense the brain activity of intelligent creatures. Therefore, it quickly discovered that this young human had an unwavering will. Left with no choice, it could only shake its octopus-like head and mock through the telepathic connection. Ignorant, low-level, foolish. You don't understand the power of the great will. All right, since that's the case, I'll answer your question. First of all, I'm the representative of the underground city of Edison. You can call me Susk. 3,500 years ago, the city we lived in was completely isolated from the material world by a powerful, unknown magic power. No matter what method we used, there was no way to break through the seal. Teleportation spells were all ineffective. After hundreds of years of research, we found that the energy surrounding the city could not be removed from the inside. Unless someone destroyed a few of the supporting points from the outside, Edison would never be able to return to the material world. As you can see, this multidimensional bag was a magic item that fell outside when the disaster happened before the barrier was formed. For some reason, it was able to maintain a certain connection with us. Secondly, Willie Galt wasn't as ordinary as he looked. He had the extremely rare anti-magic blood. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken the initiative to lure him to dig out the treasure buried deep underground. Otherwise, do you think that a lowly human could have survived the terrible shipwreck? Furthermore, he could have found the treasure buried deep underground more than 1,500 years ago. In fact, Even the giant sea monsters that attacked the ship were slaves of the Great Will. We were the ones who discovered the hidden power of Willie Galt's bloodline. So we attacked the ship he was on. Destroying the supporting points required the power of the anti-magic blood. That was why I tolerated his mistakes again and again. If it was anyone else, they would have died 10,000 times already. Lastly, Willie Galt's blood and graffiti is a map that leads to the underground tunnel and to Edison. I hope that he or his descendants will be able to come and save us after gaining a certain amount of power. That's all I have to say. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. But after you ask, please return the multidimensional bag to Willie Galt. Of course, if you're willing to help us with him, I guarantee that you'll receive the same generous rewards. Automatically filtering out the empty promises, as well as the contempt and disdain for human beings, Andre quickly figured out the whole story. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, and an unnoticeable sinister smile flashed across his face. Why should I believe you? Mind flayers don't have a good reputation. According to the records in the books, they only see humans as slaves and food. Perhaps burning this multidimensional bag would be the best choice. At least it would solve all the problems once and for all. No, you can't do that. I swear in the name of the Great Will. I won't lie to you. Seeing the crimson flames explode in an instant, the Mind Flayer immediately shouted in agitation. He even used the little psionic ability he had stored to form a barrier, isolating himself from the burning flames. Hee, looks like you really care about this multidimensional bag. All right, now we can sit down and talk about the conditions. After confirming the importance of the Mind Flayer's multidimensional bag, Andre's signature smile appeared on his face. He knew that he was already in an invincible position. Next, it was time for him to extort the Mind Flayers. He hoped that this city called Edison would not be too disappointing. Chapter 751. Susk was a Mind Flayer. To be exact, he was a newborn that had just turned from a tadpole into an adult Mind Flayer. Compared to the lifespan of the Mind Flayers, which was 130 years old, their psionic powers were limited. Otherwise, they would not have been repelled by the strong resistance when they used mind control. The truly powerful elders of the Mind Flayers could even turn an adult dragon into a slave without any resistance, let alone a mere mental resistance. Unfortunately, there were no more elders in Edison. Not to mention elders, there were less than 15 adult Mind Flayers left. The rest of them were either in hibernation to save on food, or had offered their brains to fuse with the Great Will. There was no other way. Due to being isolated from the material world, Eddies could not obtain enough slaves from the outside world. Without enough slaves, the Mind Flayers would not have enough food, and there would not be enough qualified hosts to hatch the tadpoles. It could be said that the city of the Mind Flayers, which was feared by countless people, had now become a graveyard that could barely maintain the minimum consumption. As the number of slaves decreased day by day, in less than 200 years, Eddies would truly become a dead city. In order to get rid of this situation, the Great Will, which was the center of the city, was a strange life form that the outside world called the Mastermind. It did not hesitate to waste its remaining psionic powers to connect the soul of one of the Mind Flayers to the dimensional bag so that it could find a way to return to the material world. Obviously, Susk was the newest person to take over this position. His predecessor had exhausted his lifespan and became a part of the Mastermind, responsible for providing all kinds of knowledge and experience. With this experience and knowledge, he quickly became a fish in water in the human society. Not only did he successfully find Willie Galt, who had the blood of anti-magic, he even used telepathy to insert certain thoughts into Willie Galt's brain. As long as the time was right, it would not be long before the merchants began to cultivate their forces. They would try to pass through the underground tunnel and find the magic barrier surrounding Edison. However, the problem was that all of this intricate plan had been destroyed by this damned human in front of him today. The most frightening thing was that the human had grasped the fatal weakness of Eddies, the dimensional bag. Just a few seconds ago, the Cortex Prime had personally issued an order for Susk to protect the only medium of communication with the outside world no matter what. There must not be any damage. Staring at Andre's right eye that did not hide its malice, it sighed helplessly in its heart. Then it asked through the spiritual link, "Tell me what you want." "Let me tell you in advance, we can't send you any material objects. If you want real rare metals, gems, and magic materials, you have to come to the underground world, to Edison City, and break the energy barrier surrounding the city. Don't worry, I'm a mage. I understand your current situation. If I'm not wrong, you should have been squeezed into the gap connected to the material world by some kind of spatial magic or energy, and this multi-dimensional bag just happened to record the coordinates of the gap at the moment of the accident, so you could get in touch with the outside world through it. According to this inference, the space in the multi-dimensional bag should be connected to Edison. It could even be used as a medium to transport some inanimate objects. How about it? Do you want to give it a try?" As Andre spoke, he used a level 0 arcane spell, magic trick, to clean the blood on his face, and then sat down on the chair. To be honest, the spiritual attack just now had caused quite a lot of damage to him. According to the data that appeared in his vision, he had lost more than 20 HP, and he was still a little dizzy. He really needed to sit down and rest for a while. "No, that's impossible. We've already tried. There's no way to transport anything to the half-plane bound to the multidimensional bag. You're completely indulging in fantasy." Susk roared in an ear-piercing voice. Its voice sounded so agitated, and its two pupil-less eyes were full of vigilance. A layer of invisible energy quickly gathered, afraid that the dirty bag would be damaged even a little bit. Feeling the psionic power in the air, Andre was not nervous at all. Instead, he laughed and spread out his hands. "Haha, relax. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean that I can't. Do you know? Compared to your psionic power, the biggest advantage of magic is understanding and creation. Although the technology of making multidimensional bags has been lost, the teleportation technology has been completely preserved. In the book Planes and Teleportation, it was explained that when a half-plane formed a hidden connection with another half-plane, what the wizards had to do was to find the point of contact between the two planes and then make a small hole. Perhaps with my casting level, I'm temporarily unable to do this, but as long as I borrow the power of the wizard tower, I can easily solve all the problems. If you don't believe me, I can show you now." As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly activated the defensive system of the wizard tower without warning. After a short second, silver arcs of light enveloped him in an instant, forming a translucent field of energy, firmly isolating the strange psionic power outside. The helpless Susk could only watch as the powerful energy crazily poured in from the entrance of the multidimensional bag, wantonly destroying the half-plane bound on the other side. The only thing it could do was curse, roar. With its pitiful psionic power, it was not enough to break through the protection of the wizard tower, let alone resist the crazy influx of energy. Just as the Mind Flayer thought that the multidimensional bag was about to be destroyed, the surrounding air suddenly began to tremble violently, and at the same time, a loud sound was heard. Terrifying cracks appeared out of nowhere, as if the entire space was about to collapse. Seeing this scene, Andre immediately stopped the energy transfer and directly put a hand into the multidimensional bag to explore the changes within. Soon, he laughed happily. "Ha ha 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 ha. It's connected. It's just as I expected. The so-called half-plane is like a bubble in a block of ice. Although there's no way to fuse them together, opening a small hole in the adjacent bubble is no problem." At this point, he suddenly turned his head and asked the Mind Flayer, who was stunned in place, "Do you want to try? I've already opened the connection between you and the multidimensional bag, and now we can finally carry out some real transactions. For example, I'll provide you with the brains of some intelligent creatures, and you provide me with some rare metals, gems, and magical materials." Chapter 752. Someone once said that investing in agriculture could earn 10 times the profit. Investing in commerce, buying and selling jewelry, art, and crafts could earn 100 times the profit. Investing in politics, supporting a prince to become king, could earn 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times the profit. Of course, before investing in politics, one had to know the ins and outs of the other party. If one met a cold-hearted person, not only would one not be able to earn any profits, one might even be willing to pay with one's life. Andre might not have invested in politics before, but now he had a monopoly business in front of him, and that was trading in the same city as the Mind Flayers. He controlled the only way they could communicate with the outside world. So as long as it was an urgent matter, no matter the price, the Mind Flayers could only accept it silently. There was no room for negotiation. In fact, this business was not much different from robbing people on the road. The only difference was that one relied on force, while the other relied on intelligence. As a cautious Mind Flayers, Susk did not trust anyone easily. But after trying to put a small stone through the barrier and into the semi-plane in the multidimensional bag, he was so excited that he could not control himself. The 4 tentacles on his face seemed to have gone crazy, and at the same time, he shouted through the telepathic connection, "How is this possible? How is this possible? You actually managed to open up the connection between Edison and the semi-plane. Something that we have not been able to do for thousands of years has been done by a mere human. Why is it impossible? You must know that any wizard with a spell casting level of 13 and above, and who has systematically studied the knowledge of teleportation and planes, can easily do this. Facts have proven that many things that seem difficult are not impossible, but that the correct method has not been thought of. That's all. Although your race has very high intelligence, but in terms of open thinking, you are far inferior to wizards. Indeed, psionic powers are a strange and incomparably powerful force. They can even create something out of nothing, interfere with matter, and turn the thoughts in one's mind into reality. From a certain point of view, this already involves the realm of the Creator. But have you ever thought, or rather researched, about the principles behind psionic powers? Andre was lying on the back of the chair in a very comfortable position as he talked to the phantom floating in front of him. Perhaps it was the first time he had seen a rare intelligent species like the Mind Flayers, so he was a little excited mentally. He wanted to put aside all the strange stories and learn more about this monster that fed on the brains of intelligent creatures. Principle? Research. Susk stared with his pupil-less eyes, completely unable to understand what the human in front of him was trying to express. All the wisdom, knowledge, and experience of the Mind Stealers came from the mastermind. It was a special life formed by the accumulation of the brains of countless dead Mind Stealers. After thousands of years of accumulation, it had surpassed the ordinary and entered the extraordinary level. Every Mind Flayer did not need to study anything from birth to death. As long as they developed according to the experience in the mainframe, their psionic abilities would naturally grow stronger with age. As for the principle of psionic powers, they had never considered it at all. Just like how most humans would never think about why they could walk upright, this part of the ability had become an instinct hidden in their genes with the passage of time. Looking at the Mind Flayer's slightly dazed expression, Andre smiled and shook his head. You don't seem to understand the meaning behind these 2 words. That's fine. I'm in a good mood today and can take a little time to explain. According to my understanding, there is no power system in this world that is built out of nothing. Be it warriors or mages, they have all gone through a long period of development. They learn from the chaotic and disorderly phenomena at the beginning, and then form little by little theories. Then, through studying these theories, they develop all kinds of skills. For example, warriors would think about how to train to make themselves stronger, have better endurance, jump higher, and run faster. So many martial arts schools were born. Priests, on the other hand, would think about how to perfectly integrate their thoughts with the god they served, so that they could obtain more and more powerful divine spells. Therefore, they developed all kinds of strange domains according to the different factions and priesthoods of the gods. That is to say, every profession developed through constant exploration. Even the mages, who lost a lot of information, created many new arcane spells in the long years. But what about you? From the moment you Mind Flayers were born, you were already set with a fixed template. You meticulously followed the arrangements of the Cortex Prime, never doubting yourself, and never considering the reason why your mind flayers were born. You just repeated what your predecessors had done over and over again, like a pool of stinking, stagnant water. It is because of this that you have been firmly trapped in the cracks of the material world for so many years, and yet you can't think of any solution. No, you're talking nonsense. We are the world's most perfect creations. We are wise, calm. We completely obey the will of a leader. We are 10,000 times more powerful than you humans who are dominated by desires and busy with internal strife all day long. Susk retorted angrily. As a mind flayer, he couldn't accept being looked down upon by a slave race, even if some of the words made sense. Andre spread out his hands indifferently. Don't get so worked up. I'm just stating a fact. Do you know that in biology, perfection means the loss of the possibility of evolution? Perhaps you're right. We humans are always controlled by desires. Perhaps one second we are very good friends, and the next second we become enemies over something. But it is this imperfection that gives humans unlimited possibilities. Have you heard of the chaotic collision theory? The original state of everything is a pile of seemingly unrelated fragments. But after this chaotic state ends, these inorganic fragments will organically come together as a whole. We may be greedy. We may fight endlessly. We may never be able to escape the control of our desires. But we have the most imaginative brains. How do you know that these seemingly low-class actions aren't the prelude to the evolution of a higher life form? As the last word left his mouth, Susk seemed to have been hit hard by a hammer. His entire body shook slightly, and his brain worked quickly, passing the words word for word to the mainframe. He couldn't believe that a human who was only fit to be a slave could come up with such a profound theory. Chapter 753. The origin and evolution of life had always been the subject of endless debate among countless scholars. Some people believed that intelligence was the development direction of higher life forms. As long as one's spirit evolved to the extreme, they could completely abandon their body and live forever in another form of pure energy. Some people believed that a strong body was a necessary characteristic of higher life forms. When the body was strong enough to crush everything, then there was naturally no need to think too much. Violence alone could solve all problems. Of course, these were only the fantasies and inferences of Earth scientists, and there was not much reliable evidence to support them. Andre only wanted to test the mind flayer to see if it was as smart and omniscient as the book said. Unfortunately, in a world where the overall education level was extremely low, even if the brain was developed, the knowledge and consultation received was very limited. It was impossible to break through the limitations of the environment. After confirming this point, the corner of his mouth rose slightly, and a trace of undetectable mockery flashed across his face. Susk, who was concentrating on the conversation with the Cortex Prime, did not notice this dangerous signal at all. After a full 5 minutes, he waved his 4 tentacles again and said through the telepathic connection, "The Great Wool wishes to obtain all the information about the chaotic collision theory, and also hopes that you can provide us with fresh brains. In return, we will give you any rare metals, gems, magic materials, knowledge, weapons, armors, and even precious psionic items. In short, we can give you anything you can think of. Okay, but before that, I hope to pay a reward to show my sincerity. After all, I was the one who opened the contact point between the two half-planes. Shouldn't you thank me?" After saying that, Andre raised his arm and gently shook the cloth bag in his hand. The meaning of his words was self-evident. There was no doubt that this was a disguised form of extortion. Although Susk was very angry, he knew that he had no right to refuse. Therefore, he closed his eyes and contacted the Cortex Prime. He immediately asked, "Say it. What kind of thanks do you want?" Andre smiled nonchalantly as he stared at the 4 tentacles that were swaying incessantly due to his anger. He replied, "Adamantine. I need a lot of adamantine. I believe that for an underground city with thousands of years of history, it shouldn't be a problem to fill 10 cubic meters of space with adamantine, right?" "What? You're dreaming. What is adamantine?" Adamantine was the hardest and rarest metal in the world. Even in the underground world, the production was extremely low. Usually, the amount of refined gold associated with a giant mineral vein will never exceed 1 cubic meter. You actually want to get 10 cubic meters at once. Probably because the price was too high, Susk finally couldn't help but raise his arms and let out a dragon-like roar. He could not believe his ears. At the same time, he could not believe that this young human in front of him dared to ask for such an exorbitant price. After all, the amount of adamantine stored in Edison's warehouse was only about 30 cubic meters. That was a fortune that had been accumulated over 1,000 years. Now, the other party wanted to take away a third of it? Absolutely impossible. Calm down, my friend. Being too excited is not good for your body. Andre was not frightened by the roar in his heart at all. Instead, he knocked on the table with a chuckle, and then emphasized in a tone that would not allow anyone to refute, "You seem to have forgotten that I am the only channel for you to contact the outside world. In other words, this transaction has been unfair from the start. I have the right to set the price, and you can only choose to agree to the transaction or not. The price for not agreeing is that you will not be able to get any resources, even the food that you need the most, brains. Now, either you satisfy my request and pay me 10 cubic meters of adamantine, or you go back and starve. If I find out that you have any ill intentions, then you will have to say goodbye to this multi-dimensional bag." After a series of probing, Andre finally revealed his fangs and bit into the other party's vitals. He believed that with the Mind Flayer's extremely rational way of thinking, he would definitely agree to this condition that was full of taking advantage of the situation. Susk was so angry that his whole body trembled. The illusory image was affected by his emotions and began to tremble violently, as if it could explode at any time. However, just as he was about to use his psionic ability to teach this greedy human a lesson, the Cortex Prime suddenly issued an order. Agree to his conditions. We currently have less than 800 slaves, and the ratio of males to females is seriously imbalanced. If we continue to eat their brains, there will not be enough slaves to hatch the tadpoles in the future. Although adamantine is a precious and rare magical metal, it is nothing compared to the continuation of the entire race. Yes, Great Will. Susk respectfully replied with his psionic power. To a city of mind flayers, the mastermind was the supreme ruler. It was the embodiment of the will of the entire race. Every member had to obey its orders unconditionally. When necessary, they would even sacrifice themselves to protect it. It was difficult for humans to understand the complex social structure of this absolute order, just like how mind flayers could never understand why humans were always tempted by low-level desires. Looking at Andre's right eye that was flashing with confidence, Susk took a deep breath and resisted the urge to smash the other party's face with his psionic ability. He slowly said, "We agree to give you 10 cubic meters of adamantine as a thank you gift, but you must also promise to satisfy our needs for food as soon as possible." "No problem. As long as you can afford it, I promise you that whatever you want will not be a problem." Andre forcibly suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and nodded calmly. To be honest, he did not expect the other party to take out 10 cubic meters of adamantine. He only wanted to test the wealth of Edison, but he never thought that he would actually get it. After all, adamantine was a metal that was denser than gold. 1 cubic meter of adamantine weighed more than 40 tons, and 10 cubic meters was equivalent to 400 tons. Generally speaking, to create an indestructible adamantine golem, one only needed to mix 5 tons of adamantine into the steel. Ordinary weapons could not even leave a mark on a golem like this. 400 tons of adamantine golems could be made into 40 of them. 40 adamantine golems could directly crush thousands of troops, and even destroy 1 or 2 kingdoms would not be a problem. From this, it could be seen how ruthless Andre was. Using the word crazy to describe it was an understatement. Chapter 755. 112 Goblins? How can there be so many? Andre raised his eyebrows in surprise. In a report a few days ago, there were only 80 goblins. In the blink of an eye, there had been a third more. As the owner of the entire wizard tower, it would be strange if he wasn't surprised. The errand boy explained with a wry smile. Goblins are like weeds to begin with. They have extremely strong vitality, especially their reproductive ability. Even rats might not be able to compare to them. As we provide them with more than enough food, they usually sleep after eating and mate after waking up. Not long ago, 7 female goblins gave birth to a few nests of young goblins. Each nest had 4 to 6 young goblins. The corners of Andre's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he heard about the terrifying reproductive abilities of the goblins. He sighed in his heart, as expected of the pest that could never be eradicated. He then nodded his head lightly. Very good. Pick out 60 adult goblins for me, then chop off their heads and send them to the guest room on the top floor. Remember, do it cleanly, especially the heads. Absolutely do not allow them to bump into anything. Without the slightest bit of pity, he directly gave the order for a cruel massacre. He planned to use the lives of 60 goblins to satisfy the mind flayer's thirst for brains. Of course, to the people living on Oraire, goblins weren't considered intelligent life forms. They were more like detestable wild beasts, and there was no need to feel guilty about killing them. The rulers of most cities and towns even issued bounties all year round. Every time a goblin was killed and its right ear brought back, they would receive a few silver coins as a reward. Be it adventurers or mercenaries, they would kill 3 to 5 goblins along the way to earn some change to buy alcohol. Hee. Don't worry, I'll have the magic golems send the heads to you in half an hour at most. The burly errand boy bowed slightly, casually picking up the executioner's axe from the rack. He walked with a sinister smile toward the cage that imprisoned the goblins. A few seconds later, a fat goblin was forcefully dragged out from within. It was pressed against the bleeding trough, struggling and cursing with all its might, as if it already knew the fate it was about to face. But unfortunately, all of this was in vain. There was only a splurt. Blood spurted out over a meter high, and the headless corpse fell straight to the ground, twitching nonstop. The odd-job worker skillfully threw the head into a wooden basket not far away. At the same time, he kicked the corpse into the ditch nearby, preparing to feed it to the wolves, lions, tigers, giant spiders, and other ferocious beasts. After doing all this, he wiped the blood off his axe and continued to search for the next gnome. It could be seen that this warrior enjoyed blood and slaughter very much. Every time he chopped off a head, he couldn't help but lick the blood that splattered on his lips, as if it was the most delicious thing in the world. He quickly pulled out the goblins one by one and chopped off their heads at a rate of 2 to 3 per minute. In less than 20 minutes, 60 heads were neatly arranged in a wooden basket. Without saying a word, the golem standing guard at the side picked up the bloody basket and ran upstairs. Very quickly, the nauseating smell of blood appeared in the reception room on the top floor. Andre pinched his nose and pointed at the goblin heads that had died with their eyes wide open. There are 60 heads here. Based on an average of 1 kilogram per head, you need to pay a total of 120 kilograms of gold, or gold coins of the same value. If there are no problems, we can begin the transaction. No problem. Just put all the heads into the multi-dimensional bag, and you'll get the gold immediately. Susk seemed to be a little impatient. The 4 tentacles around his mouth lifted up, revealing the chilling mouth part inside. There was no doubt that it was hungry and very, very hungry. It had never eaten its fill since birth, only maintaining a diet of once every 3 months. The long-term hunger and thirst had caused its psionic powers to grow slowly, and it was still almost the same as when it had just completed its transformation. Normally, mind flayers needed to eat the brain of an intelligent creature every month in order to maintain the basic consumption of their bodies. If they did not eat for 4 whole months, there was a possibility that they would starve to death. In other words, in order to ensure that the entire city would not collapse due to the lack of slaves, the mastermind of Edison had forcefully limited the amount of food each mind flayers could eat, only keeping them in a state where they would not starve to death. Imagine How would a person who had been starved for 10 whole years react when they saw a large pile of food in front of them? It was already very reserved of them not to pounce on it and start gorging themselves. Looking at the other party's distorted face due to extreme hunger, Andre smiled and stretched out his left hand. First, give me the item to block the mind control. I know that after you eat these brains, your psionic powers will increase greatly. For safety's sake, I need insurance. Gasp. More and more rapid panting. Susk was obviously about to go crazy from hunger. Through the mind connection, one could even hear the beast-like breathing, and at the same time, it emitted waves of energy visible to the naked eye. His rationality was struggling on the verge of collapse, and could collapse at any time. My friend, calm down. You only need to fulfill the additional conditions in advance, and you can immediately use these fresh and delicious brains. Think about it. If you attack me now, what will the consequences be? Not only will you lose the food that is about to be in your hands, you will also lose the only medium to communicate with the outside world. Andre did not seem to be nervous at all. Instead, he raised his arm and shook the multi-dimensional bag in his right hand, using a playful tone to remind the other party that the initiative was still in his hands. Perhaps the mastermind was reminding Susk that it was not the time to turn hostile, or perhaps the multi-dimensional bag calmed him down again. In short, after a short few seconds, the mind flayers did not hide their hatred and said through the mind connection, "Human, you are greedy. At the same time, cunning. Very well, we can agree to your request. But I hope this is the last time, or else." Without waiting for the other party to finish speaking, Andre deliberately put on an impatient look and interrupted. "All right, let's stop these boring probing. I can't wait to see the difference between the magical items you make and the ones made by the mages." "As you wish," Susk replied coldly as he opened his arms and blew on them. Andre immediately reached into the multidimensional bag and pulled out a headband inlaid with a colorless, transparent gem. As soon as he held it in his hand, he faintly felt that it was different from any magical item he had seen before. To be precise, this thing should be called a psionic item. It was made by the mind flayers with their psionic powers and was not a magical item in the ordinary sense. Chapter 756. Mind Shield Headband. Made with the unique craftsmanship of the mind flayers, the wearer is immune to all charm, control, suggestion, hypnosis, and other magical effects. It can also prevent any form of mind detection. Please note, this item is not a permanent enchantment. It must be recharged after a certain period of time. Remaining time, for 1,400 hours. As the Arcane, I finished scanning the entire headband and faithfully fed back the detailed information. Andre instantly realized that the mind flayers had the same idea as him. Neither of them had good intentions. His plan was to use this dimensional bag, the only medium he had to communicate with the outside world, to pull out the tendons and peel off his skin bit by bit. It would be best if he could even suck out his marrow. When Edison could no longer give him what he needed, he would not hesitate to turn on him. Of course, the mind flayers' thoughts were surprisingly similar. They wanted to use this completely unequal trade to quickly recover their strength. After half a year, the Mind Shield headband's defensive ability would disappear. They would then slowly use suggestion and mind control to turn Andre into an obedient slave. It could be said that both sides were acting from their own point of view, maximizing the amount of resources they urgently needed. There was no right or wrong, and there was no good or evil. It was just to survive in this dangerous world. After thinking this through, Andre did not question Susk's sinister intentions. Instead, he smiled meaningfully and tied the headband on his forehead. After all, this thing could guarantee that he would not be controlled by the mind ability for half a year. It was better to have something useful than nothing. In an instant, the colorless and transparent gem released an invisible force field that tightly wrapped around his head. The mind detection he had faintly felt was completely isolated a meter away. It seemed that the mind flayers were indeed worthy of being called experts in the field of mind abilities. If it was an arcane or divine protection of the same level, it would at most be able to repel the mine detection outside the skin. As for the force field that could be expanded outwards, it would need to be at least 2 levels higher. Very good. Exquisite workmanship, near-perfect gem cutting techniques, and unimaginable enchantment. It's hard to imagine that you've retained such excellent skills after being separated from the world for so long. Even though it was just for show, Andre was not stingy with his praise. Because of the very new stitches on both sides, he could vaguely tell that this headband was definitely made not long ago. Perhaps it was made within a few minutes of the additional conditions. For a city of mind flayers that was on the brink of famine and destruction, this meant that they still preserved a large amount of knowledge and a complete set of operating systems. Compared to basic resources such as adamantine, mithril, currency, and gems, this was what he desired the most. Susk was obviously starving and was obviously in no mood to nonsense. He waved his tentacles and impatiently shouted, "Heads! Put those heads on the ground into your dimensional bag right now. You have to know that they've been chopped down for more than 20 minutes. In another 10 minutes, they will lose their edible value." Andre nodded with a smile. No problem. I'm a businessman who upholds the spirit of a contract. I'll definitely keep my promises. Having said that, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. 2 wooden frames soaked in blood flew into the air and were immediately sucked into the dimensional bag. The Cortex Prime, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately transferred them to its own city. Then, all the living mind flayers swarmed in. In a short 10 seconds, one of the heads quickly shriveled up. If one were to pry open the skull, one would find that the brain inside had completely disappeared, leaving behind only the empty skull. It had to be said that these monsters were truly starving. Even the part of the brain connected to the spine was not spared. Normally, mind flayers would only devour the core part of the brain. Only the consciousness in this part, known as the gray matter, could provide them with sufficient energy. But these goblins before them were not spared even a little bit of residue. It was clear to see how much food Eddie's was lacking. The feeding did not last long. In just a few minutes, a third of the 60 goblin heads had been eaten. Although hunger still troubled every mind flayers, they all stopped and began to pry open the remaining heads. They took out the brains inside and sent them to the brain pool in the center of the city. This was to ensure that the most important part of the city, the Cortex Prime, would receive sufficient nourishment. A wizard who had lived in the city of the mind flayers for a period of time once said that, including the demons, there was no other race in the universe that understood order and obedience better than the mind flayers. Similarly, there was no other race that could give up on themselves and completely integrate into the group. Andre, who had always been patient, sat quietly on the chair and waited for the other party to pay the gold. He was not at all worried that the mind flayers would go back on their word. After all, a generous buyer who had paid 10 cubic meters of adamantine would not go back on his word for a mere 120 kilograms of gold. Facts had proven that the truly wealthy would not haggle over such a small profit. After dealing with all 40 heads, Susk's phantom came to life again and spoke through the telepathic link. "The gold you want is in the dimensional bag. You can take it out at any time." The Great Will is very satisfied with this transaction, so he has decided to pay with the highest gold content in the underground and the least likely to wear and tear. "Oh, Dark Elven gold?" Andre, who was shocked, hurriedly reached into the dimensional bag and took out a handful of exquisite gold coins that weighed about 10 to 15 grams. The coins were printed with spiders and inscriptions on both sides. Compared to the inferior gold coins on the surface, which were crudely made and even blurred due to the long circulation, the former was like a work of art rather than a currency. From the black luster flowing on the surface of the coin, it was obvious that it had been reinforced by magic. Holding it in his hand, he did not feel the softness of gold at all. Instead, it was a bit like a dollar coin that he had seen in his previous life. How is it? Isn't it interesting? As long as you continue to provide the materials that Edison needs, we guarantee that you will receive unimaginable returns. For example, the manufacturing process of this gold coin or the creation of psionic items. Perhaps it was because he had just eaten, but Susk had regained the calmness that the mind flayers should have. He began to test Andre with all kinds of temptations, trying to find out his weakness so that he could be more targeted in the next transaction. Chapter 757. The Goddess is Supreme. Every coin that flickered with golden radiance was imprinted with the unique language of the Dark Elves. This was a fanatical religious belief, and at the same time, it represented their repressive, cruel, callous, and merciless society. Ever since the civil war that had lasted for several years, the defeated Dark Elves had escaped into the underground, completely falling to the side of chaos and evil. Their original tolerant, cheerful, and passionate side of life and art had all been abandoned, leaving behind only their elegant and fatal side. They were the undisputed overlords of the entire underground world. Apart from mind flayers, beholders, giant dragons, and a few other races with extremely strong individual strength, the rest were all enslaved. Even the Grey Dwarves, who were known as the second strongest underground faction, were barely surviving. According to ancient legends, the Dark Elves seemed to have grasped a large amount of evil magic techniques. They were able to infuse malicious curses into weapons, armor, and even any item. Some adventurers who had been to the underground world claimed that the weapons they created could easily pierce through the best full-body armor on the surface and pierce into giant dragons covered in hard scales. The only downside was that once exposed to sunlight, they would turn into a pile of dust in just a few days. Of course, since the Dark Elves were mentioned, the spider goddess who had always guided them down the path of depravity had to be mentioned as well. She was the only faith of over 90% of the Dark Elves. Through her cruel and sick religion, she tightly grasped her believers in the palm of her hand, breaking all ethical and moral restraints. She made them harm and kill each other, and even blood relatives were no exception. It could be said that rather than calling what Andre held in his hand a gold coin, it could be said that it was the epitome of the Dark Elves' values. Many merchants with connections to the underground world would purchase this gold coin at a high price, because the Dark Elves did not recognize any other currency apart from the spider coin. However, what truly interested him wasn't the gold coin itself, but the intricate and complicated enchantment on its surface. It was common knowledge that mind flayers had a morbid desire to collect things, be it technology, knowledge, or different types of intelligent creatures. They were all targets of their collection. Since there was the Dark Elves' gold coin making technology, there would naturally be powerful magic that originated from ancient times, brought from another world by the elves. After all, it was a system that was completely different from the ancient magic civilization. It had a lot of research value, and no mage would let it go easily. Fiddling with the gold coins in his hand, Andre thought for a few minutes and suddenly suggested, "My dear friend, some of your conditions have moved me. I think we should sign a more detailed agreement so that we can both get what we need in future transactions. What do you think?" A silver light flashed in Susk's pupilless eyes, and he nodded happily. "Indeed. I also think that building a framework can reduce unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. After all, we will have more and more transactions in the future, and the number will also increase. It is necessary to maintain a good friendship." Friendship? Andre sneered in his heart, but on the surface he still wore a smile and pretended to be in deep agreement. Since both sides have reached a consensus on this point, then I won't be polite and put forward my opinion first. First, I intend to divide the transactions into two categories. One is the exchange of materials. For example, I will provide you with fresh brains, and you'll provide me with gold, mithril, adamantine, gems, and other underground specialties. Because this kind of transaction does not involve more precious knowledge and technology, in theory, there is no limit. As for the price, we can slowly discuss it and find a balance that both sides can accept. The other type was the exchange of magical items or spiritual items. Because there is a relatively large difference between the two, we will temporarily classify them according to the standard of magic energy level, and all items of the same energy level will be regarded as equivalent. Secondly, Regarding knowledge and technology, I think we should be cautious. We must not pry into each other's core privacy, or we will immediately terminate all cooperation. Lastly, and most importantly, none of you are allowed to secretly use your mental powers to control, charm, or hint a third party without my permission. Furthermore, none of you are allowed to casually appear like you are now. These are my requirements. You can now raise yours. It had to be said that negotiating with the Mind Flayer made Andre feel like he was in the business circle in his previous life. However, in the business circle, the worst situation was bankruptcy, and now, the slightest carelessness could put his life in danger. The latter was more exciting and challenging. Waving his 4 tentacles, Susk did not give a reply for a long time, as if he was communicating with the mastermind. Although the Mind Flayer was very intelligent, it rarely spoke. Most of the time, it discussed problems through telepathy. This way, it could ensure that no one could hear it, and it could also train its own strength. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. After 2 or 3 minutes, Susk seemed to have received some kind of order. He immediately controlled the phantom to move forward and stretched out a tentacle to press on Andre's forehead. Instantly, a cold, mechanical voice echoed in his mind. Human, we agree to the conditions in principle, but you must add one more condition, and that is to answer some of our questions about Arcana. In return, we will also answer some questions that you are interested in and help you when you're in danger. You're not Susk. Who are you? Andre sensed that there was something wrong with the other party's tone. He frowned and asked, Me? You can call me the Great Will, or you can call me the Mastermind. I am the center of Edison, and also the supreme ruler of this city. I know that you have a greedy heart, but that does not matter. As long as you can meet my requirements, whether it is adamantine, mithril, gemstones, gold, or any kind of technology from the underground world, they can all be given to you. However, there is one condition. If I find out that you are lying to me, the consequences will be severe. All right, today's deal ends here. We will have a second one in 3 days. This time, it is about knowledge and technology. I hope you can prepare in advance. After that, the self-proclaimed mastermind's voice disappeared without a trace. It was like an invisible ghost, coming and going in a hurry, not giving Andre a chance to explain. Perhaps in its opinion, it was already a great blessing for it to condescend and talk to a human. If it was in the past, it would have used telepathy to control him and turn him into a slave. Chapter 758. The setting sun spilled its golden rays onto the harbor, and the sea water crashed against the rocks of the harbor with the ebb and flow of the tide. It was a beautiful and spectacular sight from afar. Unfortunately, the swindler Jess wasn't in the mood to admire the beautiful scenery outside the window. At this moment, his hands were crossed on his knees, and his eyes were fixed on the burly man in front of him. As long as he felt that the situation was slightly wrong, he would immediately order the mercenaries behind him to attack and strangle the danger in the cradle. Ever since he'd accepted the mission of dividing and roping in the small guilds scattered in the lower city, Jess's nerves had always been in a tense state. Whether it was negotiating or fighting, he always liked to put himself in a position of absolute safety. The reason was simple. He knew better than anyone else just how short-sighted and stupid these bastards who usually threw their weight around on the streets were. This was especially true for idiots who thought they had some brute strength. Their first reaction when encountering a problem wasn't to sit down and talk and clear up any misunderstandings, but to pick up a weapon and fight first. They didn't care if they died or not. In this barbaric, primitive, and backward world, most illiterate commoners were more willing to believe in the power of fists and swords, or more accurately, violence, rather than intelligence. Obviously, this kind of value was too dangerous for Jess, who relied on his brain to make a living. Even though he had the famous Carriamir mercenary group by his side, he still didn't feel the slightest bit of security. After all, he was only a swindler who knew a bit of swordsmanship and wasn't a professional. His body was very weak, and a poisoned arrow shot out of the darkness could take his life. Of course, Jess didn't know that the brawny man in front of him was actually even more nervous than him. Due to the decision of the underground guild leaders to retreat to the upper city, the rat men had concentrated their forces and destroyed many of the most powerful guilds in the lower city in just a few days. Those who resisted were slaughtered along with their families, and their corpses were hung on the roofs as a warning to those idiots who dared to continue pledging their loyalty to the underground guilds. Now, anyone with the slightest bit of intelligence understood that the situation in Valence City was very likely to change. They all put down their original plan of defending and waiting for reinforcements and began to try to make contact with the rat men. Unfortunately, Old Bernie had already informed his subordinates to ignore the guilds that had given up on resistance and focus on destroying the remaining forces of the enemy in this area. It was also because of this lack of response that the leaders of the guilds, who were scheming, had a hard time figuring out what was going on. Silently looking at Jesse's face with a fake smile, the burly man had an impulse to smash his fist. But considering the combat power of the Carriamere mercenary group, he immediately gave up this tempting idea. Stroking the thick beard on his chin, he hesitantly asked, "Before I make a choice, you have to tell me who is the one who planned all of this. What's your relationship with the rat orcs? What does it matter?" "Huh." Jess laughed contemptuously, then replied in a very arrogant tone. "You can understand it as, the rat man is serving my master. Not only the rat men, even those mysterious organizations that constantly attack the underground guilds are also part of master subordinates." "What? How is this possible?" The brawny man suddenly stood up, trembling with excitement. He could not believe that Old Bernie, who was known as the Mobile Calamity, would make his tribe serve others. "Hee, haven't you noticed? All the guilds that chose to obey us have never been attacked in any way, and those who dared to refuse would mysteriously disappear in just a few hours. Open your eyes and take a good look at the outside world. The guild that have ruled this city for hundreds of years are completely finished. A new ruler is rising. Either submit or be destroyed. I believe that you are a smart person, and smart people will often make the best choice for themselves based on the actual situation. Now tell me, do you choose to join us, or do you choose to die? Don't worry, I am a very patient person. You still have 5 minutes to think about it. If there is no definite answer after 5 minutes, then I will treat it as giving up, and the next person to talk to you will not be me, but the mercenaries behind me. We have always had only one attitude towards our enemies, and that is to completely destroy their spirit and body, leaving no future troubles. So, even if it's for your beautiful wife and adorable son, please think carefully and carefully. I've seen too many tragedies and deaths in the past few days. I hope that today's negotiation won't be the beginning of another tragedy." After saying that, Jess put on a pitiful face, as if he was a saint, thinking for the other party. It has to be said that his actions at this moment made Mabel, who was standing not far away acting as a guard, feel her stomach hurt and the corner of her mouth twitched involuntarily. The reason was simple. All the guilds that were cruelly exterminated were personally ordered by Jess, and he did not show any discomfort in the process of killing, but rather enjoyed it. Without a doubt, the words just now were equivalent to a demon from the bottomless abyss, opening its bloody mouth and telling its victims that it was a good person whose morals were comparable to that of a paladin. The brawny man, who was more than 8 meters tall, clearly not only had a body of beautiful muscles, his brain was also not bad, and he instantly understood the hidden threat in the words. As a veteran of the streets and alleys for more than 10 years, he understood that the decision he was about to make was not only related to the lives of more than 20 people in the guild, but also the safety of his family. Orier did not have the concept of not harming family members. In this land where great vengeance prevailed, every change of power was accompanied by cruel purges and killings. Anyone who was related to the enemy by blood, whether it was an old man in his 70s or 80s or a newborn baby, would be exterminated. Looking at the brawny man's nervous and conflicted face, Jess felt great satisfaction in his heart. He liked the feeling of controlling the fate of others, especially those who made the wrong choice and had their guilds destroyed by the mercenaries. One by one, They knelt on the ground and cried bitterly, loudly begging him to be lenient, and he only needed to say a word to decide their life and death. Power. It was always the most beautiful poison. The liar Jess had become a hopeless addict, although this power did not belong to him, but was bestowed by Andre. But power was power, and he had secretly vowed his heart that no matter what, he would not let the power slip away from his hands, even if he had to sacrifice his soul and faith for it. Chapter 759. Waiting was the most difficult thing to endure, especially for those who were on the weaker side. Every second felt like an hour. A few hoodlums wielding daggers and short swords were sweating all over, and their eyes revealed unconcealable fear. Even though they were all ruthless characters on the streets, but in front of the famous Carriamir mercenary group, they were no different from lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Once their boss made the wrong choice, a fierce battle would be unavoidable, and perhaps everyone would die. The brawny man seemed to feel his underlings' nervous and uneasy emotions. He wanted to open his mouth several times to say something, but he didn't know what to say in the end. Finally, he let out a helpless sigh. Sigh, I choose to submit. After saying this, he seemed to have drained the last bit of strength from his body. His entire person was like a deflated balloon, and his two eyes were filled with confusion. Ha ha, very good, very good. I knew you would make the right choice. Seeing another gang succumb to his tyrannical power, Jace suppressed the excitement in his heart and pretended to open his arms, giving the other party a warm hug. Hee, right choice? Perhaps, whether it's right or not, we'll only know the result after the dust settles. Speak, what do you need me to do? The brawny man took a deep breath and asked with a face full of bitterness. Even though he was a little unwilling to become a pawn in someone else's hands, he knew he had no other choice. Valen City was a special city. It had abandoned the order and laws of many southern city-states and followed the naked law of the jungle. The weak had to follow the will of the strong, or they would immediately meet with disaster. Without a doubt, Jace, who had the support of the Carriamir mercenary group, was such a strong person. Perhaps a mere 50 or so mercenaries weren't much in the chaotic and enormous lower city, but to a small gang with only 20 or so people, they were as undefeatable as a giant dragon. Do what? Ha ha! No, my friend, you don't have to do anything. You only need to maintain the law and order of your territory and wait for orders. We are not a despicable, shameless, and despicable guild. We definitely won't send our underlings to their deaths. Remember, from today onwards, stop all grave businesses, especially human trafficking. My master doesn't like people going against his will. With that, Jess gently patted the burly man's shoulder. After 2 days of training, he had already summed up a set of experience in dealing with small gangs. First, he would flex his muscles. Next, he would threaten and intimidate the other party. Once the other party showed fear, he would placate them with kind words. Usually, as long as the other party was not a die-hard fan of the Underground Guild, they would choose to submit temporarily. As for how much of this surrender was sincere, that would depend on the outcome of the battle between Andre and the guild. Really? I don't have to do anything? The brawny man couldn't believe his ears. One must know that during the era of the underground guilds, any small guild that wanted to gain their recognition and protection had to complete a harsh test in order to prove their worth. But now, someone was telling him that he would be recognized if he stayed put. It was like a joke. Looking at the other party's surprised expression, Jay smiled and spread out his hands. That's right. We don't need to do anything. We have enough power to deal with everything that might happen. All right, that's all for today. If you have any questions, you can send someone to contact me at any time. I still have other things to do. You can go back first. The brawny man nodded thoughtfully. Without another word, he quietly left through the back door with his subordinates. As soon as they left, Mabel sat on the ground and laughed as she teased. Jace, you're really a born liar. In just 2 days, you've successfully fooled 7 gang leaders. At this speed, you'll be able to clean up the entire downtown in 3 days. Idiot. This isn't called a liar. It's called the art of language. Jace retorted with gritted teeth. But soon, He gave up the intention to continue explaining. He muttered to himself, "Forget it. Anyway, with your stone-like brain, it's impossible for you to understand how important what I'm doing is." "All right, I'm a stone-like brain." Mabel had always been good-tempered. She shrugged her shoulders indifferently. "Right, it's already evening. The sky will be dark in another 2 hours. Why isn't Portia back yet?" Jace narrowed his eyes and gazed at the sunset outside the window. He shook his head lightly. "I don't know. Maybe she's met with some trouble. After all, Greatsword Berman isn't an easy character to deal with. We have to teach him a lesson before we meet. Otherwise, he won't give in so easily. Sigh, I really hope this ends soon." Just as Mabel was sighing, Portia was hiding in the shadows a few streets away. She was preparing to launch an attack on Greatsword Berman, who was only 10 meters away from her. She knew very well that she didn't need to kill her opponent in this operation. She only needed to let him know that he could lose his life at any time. Thus, there was no need to be too nervous. Bending down and taking light steps, the halfling bandit slowly left the protection of the shadows. She started to approach her target silently like a cat. Greatsword Berman, who looked to be in his early 50s, didn't notice at all. He was still sitting motionlessly with his head facing the window, as if he was admiring the beautiful sunset. What an idiot with no sense of vigilance. I really don't know how he managed to survive in the chaotic downtown until today. After secretly despising the other party in her heart, Portia suddenly sped up and dashed forward. She placed her dagger on Greatsword Berman's neck. However, the moment her fingers touched his neck, she suddenly realized that something was wrong. She hurriedly took a few steps back and asked vigilantly, "You're not Berman. Who are you?" "Oh, hee. As expected of a halfling who can sense danger in advance. You can even see through magical transformations." Saying that, the impersonator raised his hand and gently wiped his face. His entire person changed rapidly and returned to his original appearance. He was none other than the vampire aristocrat, Gillis de Champney. Pale face, sharp fangs, scarlet eyes, and the negative energy that was constantly emitted. There was also a reflection that wasn't reflected in the mirror. Portia instantly understood that the person standing in front of her wasn't human, but an undead from head to toe. Chapter 760. Vampires were an extremely special type of undead creature. Although they had human characteristics, they didn't cast shadows and wouldn't leave behind reflections in mirrors. Thus, they could be recognized with just a bit of attention. Evil undead, why did you appear in this room? Where did Greatsword Berman go? Portia asked cautiously as she carefully inched towards the mirror. According to many legends and records, vampires had many weaknesses, including their inability to tolerate the smell of garlic. They would feel a strong sense of fear when facing a mirror or the holy emblem of a god. If they were directly exposed to sunlight, their abilities would be severely weakened, and they might even die. It was clear that in this room, only the mirror and sunlight outside the window could play a key role in a battle. However, the sun was already setting, and it wouldn't be long before it disappeared below the sea level. Moreover, the window was a little far away, so the sunlight might not be able to be used. Only the mirror was close enough to ensure her safety. Watching the halfling's small movements, the corners of Giles's mouth curled up slightly. He replied in a playful tone, "Greatsword Berman? Is it the name of that idiot? Don't worry, he's already dead. I've sucked every last drop of blood from his body. I have to say, as an old warrior, the taste of his blood isn't bad. It's like aged red wine. If it wasn't for the fact that time was a little tight, I might have chosen to make him a blood thrall. All right, let's stop chatting here. Otherwise, Casimir will be impatient from waiting. Now tell me, are you going to hand it over on your own accord, or hand it over after I capture you and turn you into a thrall? You're in cahoots with Casimir?" Portia was like a cat with its fur standing on end. Her eyes were wide open, and the smile on her face had disappeared. It was replaced by nervousness and unease. "In cahoots? No, little thing. Our relationship is much more complicated than you think. All right, let's stop chatting. Hand over the hell jewel, and I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, at this point, Giles suddenly paused and reached out with his right hand, making a grasping motion. Portia only felt a sharp pain in her heart. Her face instantly turned pale, and her throat felt itchy and sweet. A second later, she spat out a mouthful of blood. In the face of supernatural power, she had no idea how to defend herself. In the blink of an eye, she was severely injured. If not for the tenacious vitality of professionals, her heart would have stopped just now. Enduring the intense discomfort in her chest, Portia bit her lower lip hard to prevent herself from fainting. At the same time, she gasped for breath and asked in a stern voice, "Bastard, what sorcery did you use on me?" "Ha ha 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 ha. Sorcery? Ignorant. That's a genuine level 5 spell. You're lucky that you didn't die immediately, but you won't be so lucky next time." Gills raised his chin slightly and looked at the short halfling with a condescending gaze. In fact, for a powerful vampire like him, physical attacks usually had little effect unless it was a weapon that had been blessed or smeared with holy water. Otherwise, he would not die easily even if he stood there and was pierced into a sieve. According to the records in the Book of the Dead, any creature that had been transformed into a vampire would have their physical fitness improved by 2 to 3 times. Whether it was their strength, agility, intelligence, or perception, everything would undergo an earth-shattering change. Even their charm was no exception. In other words, even if Giles' strength was 12 before he became a vampire, his current strength was 18 to 20, and he could lift a 4-wheeled carriage with just one hand. How could a human be a match for such a monster? Not to mention the series of supernatural abilities that accompanied it. Portia was very clear that she had no chance of winning in a head-on confrontation. Her only chance was to take advantage of the fact that the sun hadn't set and rush out at lightning speed. Standing under the sun, even the most powerful vampire would be weakened by more than 90% of his combat power. No hesitation, no confusion. The moment the pain in her heart eased a little, she suddenly grabbed the mirror behind her and fiercely threw it towards the opposite side. She then jumped up and dashed toward the window, not far away. It was common knowledge that vampires had an innate aversion to mirrors. Due to the incompleteness of their souls, they were unable to leave behind an image in the mirror. Every time they looked into a mirror, they would often have uncontrollable negative emotions. It was similar to the nausea of ordinary people, but they wouldn't suffer any actual harm. Seeing the mirror flying towards him, Giles' eyes shone with an evil light. He raised his hand and cast an acid arrow. In the blink of an eye, the smooth bronze mirror was corroded into holes, no longer able to clearly reflect a person's shadow. After doing all this, he snarled sinisterly, "Very good, very good. You successfully infuriated me. Little thing, the next 2 things won't be as simple as death. I'll turn you into a mindless slave and personally kill your cherished friends one by one. In the end, you will forever be immersed in regret, unable to extricate yourself. Huh, you want to catch me? Dream on. Damn monster. I'll definitely make you pay for this in the future." Portia, who was about to rush to the window, turned her head and spat fiercely. "Hee, foolish and short-sighted mortal. Today, I'll let you experience the powerful strength of the King of the Night. Unparalleled strength." Giles opened his mouth as he spoke, emitting an ultrasonic wave that ordinary people couldn't hear. Portia felt that something was wrong and subconsciously slowed down her footsteps. Just as she was about to smash open the window, the light outside the house suddenly dimmed for some reason, as if it had turned from evening to midnight. "Damn it! What happened?" Portia cursed under her breath, hurriedly raising her head to glance at the sky. As the saying goes, you don't know until you see it, but you'll be shocked when you see it. The sky above the house was surrounded by tens of thousands of bats. At a glance, it was so densely packed that one couldn't help but feel numb. It was obvious that these bats were summoned by the special ability of vampires. They had completely blocked out the sunlight, and even if she rushed out now, it would be of no use. Looking at the halfling's deathly pale face, Giles' mouth curved in an arc. His entire body turned into a bolt of lightning, instantly appearing beside Portia and biting her neck. There was no struggle. There was no pain. After a short few seconds, her pupils began to dilate, and her body temperature became lower and lower. As the last drop of blood was sucked dry, she completely lost her life. Chapter 761. Darkness. Ice cold. Silence. As far as her eyes could see, it was a vast expanse of gray. There was no sky, no land, and nothing alive. Since the last trace of consciousness had completely left her body, Bosha found herself in a completely unfamiliar place, the world of the dead and souls. Of course, as a devout believer of the halfling god of thieves, Brindle, she was not very afraid of death. Because according to the agreement between the gods and humans, as long as she did not betray her faith, the gods had the obligation to take her into their kingdom and continue living in another form. In Orire, death did not mean the end, but the beginning of another life. Just as Bosha began to look around for the door to the divine kingdom, she suddenly found a black spot on her chest for some reason, and it was getting bigger and bigger. She was now in the state of soul. Normally, she should remain silver and transparent. Any other color meant that there was a problem with the soul itself. Time did not flow in the world of the dead. She did not know how long had passed. Maybe a few seconds, maybe a few hours, or maybe a few days. In short, Bosha began to feel waves of inexplicable thirst from the bottom of her heart. It was an indescribable feeling, as if something terrifying was slowly awakening. Damn it, what's wrong with me? She gritted her teeth and cursed while desperately trying to block the black hole in her chest that was already thicker than her wrist. But it was all in vain. When the black hole expanded to the entire chest cavity, a hole suddenly opened in the gray sky. Bosha was then dragged up by a huge force and was quickly swallowed by the huge crack. Bang! She felt as if she had bumped into something, and her whole body was sore and painful. No, sore. Didn't I die? The halfling's mind had always been very quick, and she immediately realized where the problem was. Slowly opening her eyes, Bosha immediately saw a face full of malice and a smile. If her memory was correct, it was the owner of this face who had killed her. But for some reason, she did not feel any hatred at all. Instead, she had an urge to get close to him. Ha ha ha, you're awake, little one. Now, I order you to get up and kneel in front of me. Gills ordered with a laugh. Without any hesitation, before her brain could even react, Portia's body faithfully carried out her orders. She lay prostrate on the ground, unable to resist at all. Fear, a great fear of the unknown welled up from the bottom of her heart. Looking at the halfling's panicked eyes, Gills bent down, smiled, and teased. Do you feel strange? He had clearly died, so how could he be resurrected? You should hate me to the core, so why do you listen to my every word? What have you done? Portia asked with a trembling voice. Ha ha, clever little thing, I've resurrected you. From now on, you're my servant, a loyal servant. Every word I say, every order I give, is a sacred word to you that can't be disobeyed. Feel your own body temperature, heartbeat, and the desire for blood hidden in your heart. You will soon find the answer. Gil's words were spoken neither hurriedly nor slowly, and his voice was just right. It was obvious that he had received a strict aristocratic education. At least in terms of etiquette, he was impeccable. But if one paid attention to his two scarlet eyes, they would immediately discover the viciousness hidden within. Portia lowered her head and glanced at the cold and pale skin on her hands and arms. She then pressed her chest, but did not feel a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and released her instincts to the maximum. The desire to drink blood quickly welled up in her heart. There was no doubt that it was as the other party had said. She was no longer a living person, but a vampire derivative. Looking at the halfling's angry eyes, Gil stretched out a hand and gently lifted her chin. Do you feel angry? Do you feel that I've desecrated your soul? Remember, this is the price you have to pay for infuriating me. Death is never the end, but another beginning. Next, I'll let you kill your best friend with your own hands. Hug his corpse and cry bitterly. Then continue to kill the next one until you completely cut off your connection with the world and become a soulless puppet. But before that, you need to hand over the Hell's Jewel. After all, although creating a tragedy is interesting, we can't delay the proper business. Don't you think so? Tremble. Her entire body couldn't help but tremble. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't commit suicide, Portia would have immediately ended her own life. She simply couldn't imagine what it would feel like to kill her incomparably familiar family and friends with her own hands. There were many things in the world that were more terrifying than death, especially those scheming masters who could toy with human nature to the peak. Many times, they only needed a few words to stir up the fear hidden in the depths of their hearts. Obviously, Gills from the vampire family Champney was one of them. No, you can't do this. I'm willing to hand over the Hell's Jewel. I'm also willing to become your loyal servant. But please let my friends and family go. They're innocent. Portia was so agitated that she spoke incoherently. Although halflings had unparalleled courage, once their psychological defenses collapsed, they weren't much different from ordinary people. Innocent? Gills laughed disdainfully. Sorry, no one in this world is innocent. In my opinion, anyone who dares to defy my will deserves to die. Don't worry, the sadness and pain are only temporary. Once you truly experience the power of a vampire, it won't take long for you to discover how shallow you were in the past. It just so happens that it's already dark. Go and bring me the Hell's Jewel. This is an order. Portia's body trembled uncontrollably as the last word left her mouth. She nodded vigorously. Yes, I'll follow your orders, my great master. Obviously, this wasn't her intention. She was under some sort of mental control. Vampires had absolute control over the derivatives they created. Unless they released them on their own accord or their master died, they would always be enslaved. Some didn't even have independent thoughts. However, in order to let Portia taste despair and pain, Gills purposely kept her thoughts intact. Perhaps in his eyes, this kind of mental torture was far more destructive than physical torture. Chapter 762. The infernal jewel wasn't actually a jewel, but a black bone about half the size of an adult's palm. It looked sparkling and translucent, very similar to magical crystals and black diamonds. However, as long as one held it in one's hand, one would immediately feel the evil thoughts hidden in one's heart. For example, lust for power, materialism, lust for sex, desire for conquest, and so on. Madness would fill one's brain, as if there was a voice incessantly clamoring in one's ears. Normally, a person with a weak will would turn from an honest farmer or peddler into an ambitious person who would do anything in a matter of minutes. Of course, its greatest use was to break through the barrier between the material world and hell. As long as it was provided with sufficient energy, it could even raise an army of devils. Hee hee! What an interesting little toy. No wonder Casimir tried every means to get it back. Playing with the infernal jewel in his hand, the corners of Gil's mouth curled up slightly, a meaningful light flickering in his eyes. Portia, who had been transformed into a vampire, knelt on the ground, trying to reduce her presence as much as possible. She had now thoroughly understood how powerful the other party's control over her was, and was afraid that the next order would be to kill her former friends. Unfortunately, many things couldn't be solved by running away. After understanding the use of the infernal jewel, Gills immediately turned his head and examined the curled-up halfling. After a full minute, he said in a playful tone, "Little thing, you're not bad. You actually hid this toy in a place no one would expect. I'm a thief, so I naturally know how to hide stolen goods." Portia replied expressionlessly, "Not bad. You're a thief, and an outstanding assassin at that. I'm now more and more optimistic about your future. Perhaps my unintentional choice will create a very useful chess piece for the family. But before that, I have to wear away the remnants of your humanity. You must know that as the favorite of the night, vampires don't need foolish kindness. Now tell me, who is the person you care about the most in the city? Saying that, Gills extended his right hand and gently lifted the halfling's chin, his entire body emitting a terrifying energy. Borsha tried her best to seal off her brain and resist the other party's orders, but it was all in vain. After struggling in pain for half a minute, she began to yield to the nature of her bloodline and slowly opened her mouth to say a name. Bernie. Bernie Ecclestone, oh, that Rat King? Gills raised his eyebrows in surprise before bursting into laughter. Ha ha, I have to say this world is really too small. I was just thinking about how to create more chaos, and you immediately gave me a surprise. Very good. I order you to kill old Bernie and hang his head in the most conspicuous place in the lower city. Yes, yes, Master. Bordia clenched her fists and trembled all over. She seemed to have used all her strength to squeeze those words out of her throat. Here you go, my little cutie. Those rat men are too rational under old Bernie's suppression. It's time to add fuel to the fire. Let's see if that guy hiding in the wizard tower can still remain calm. With that, an incomparably cruel smile appeared on Gil's pale face, as if he could already see Valen City turning into a river of blood. Assassination was never an easy matter. Add to that the fact that Borsha had always been against killing her friends. She didn't make a move even though she had been hiding in the vicinity of Old Bernie's cave after receiving the order. 2 days passed by in the blink of an eye. Just as she was using the last of her humanity to resist Gil's orders, the teleportation gate in the underground wizard tower was finally completed. Without any hesitation, Angus immediately passed this news to Andre. The latter did a simple test and immediately moved it to the entrance of the cemetery in the upper city after discovering that there were no problems. Feeling the negative energy coming from the entrance, Andre was expressionless as he spoke to the bald wizard beside him. You can begin. Remember, don't try to control the berserk fire elemental in the instant that the planar passage is connected. Such actions have no effect other than angering them. Leave everything to me. Understood. Don't worry. I guarantee that there won't be such idiots among those participating in this ceremony. Angus bowed slightly and turned to the side of the enormous teleportation gate. He never liked to speak nonsense, so he only nodded at the other 3 wizards around him. He then took out a magic scroll that he'd prepared beforehand and began to read it aloud. The other 3 mages and the 9 apprentices all echoed in unison. In just a few minutes, these incantations caused a strong resonance, and a terrifying amount of magic energy was quickly gathered and slowly flowed towards the 2-meter-tall metal door. Not long after, an oval red crack was formed on the door. Scorching flames and high temperatures spewed out from the other side of the crevice. Even from tens of meters away, one could still feel the suffocating heat waves assaulting their faces. Without a doubt, the gate to the fire elemental plane had been opened. However, the passage wasn't very stable, so the fire elemental couldn't pass through. Looking at the boiling lava and raging flames, Jennifer opened her mouth wide and sighed to herself. Oh, my heavens, this is too magnificent. It's hard to imagine that there can be life in such a world. According to the records in the Book of Creation, the 4 elemental planes of wind, water, fire, and earth are the foundation of everything. Before our world was born, they had already existed for hundreds of millions of years. Elemental life is even older than most of the gods. I suggest that if you have the chance in the future, you study more about this. You'll find a lot of interesting content. All right, now stand aside obediently. What's going to happen next isn't something you can participate in. After briefly explaining the importance of the elements, Andre gently pushed Jennifer to the side. He himself stood in front of the gate, raised his arms high, and transformed them into fire elemental form. His expression was solemn, his eyes focused, and he called out in a low and solemn voice, "El from a scorching land, primordial life from the birth of the universe. In the name of the fire elemental prince Isoldezer, I order you to pass through the gate. Come to me. Obey my orders. Destroy my enemies. Chapter 763. Responding to your summons. Honorable Prince of Flames. Accompanied by a deafening roar, a giant fire elemental that was more than 4 meters tall took the lead and stepped through the portal, appearing in front of everyone in an extremely magnificent manner. It did not have any facial features, nor did it have a specific form. It was just a ball of burning flames. Even its language was not the surface language that ordinary people could understand, but the ancient language of the fire elemental. However, as the chosen of Acer Desir, Andre could understand the roar of the fire elemental effortlessly. He took 2 steps forward and slowly stretched out his right hand. The burning flames on the 2 bodies seemed to be attracted to each other and quickly connected. While feeling the heat from the fire elemental, he asked, "Name? Tell me your name." "You can call me Tavi, General of Flames from the River of Flames of Daikas," the giant fire elemental replied in a muffled voice. "Very well, my general. Now you can let your army pass through the passage and wipe out the undead creatures in this underground tomb. How about it? Can you do it?" As a knowledgeable mage, Andre knew very well that most elemental creatures were very simple. There was no need to beat around the bush when dealing with them. It was best to be straightforward, otherwise there was a possibility that they would not be able to understand the command correctly. The giant fire elemental took a deep breath of the negative energy in the tomb and immediately said in a contemptuous tone, "No problem, Honorable Duke. They're just a few pitiful little bugs. I promise that I can burn all the undead creatures in half an hour." "Then what are you waiting for? Please go ahead and burn as much as you want." With that, Andre turned sideways and made a pleased gesture. He knew that elemental creatures were always straightforward. They would not show arrogance or excessive modesty. Since they made a promise, it meant that they were 100% confident. The gigantic fire elemental, which had never been courteous, shook its burning body and sent a wisp of its own flame into the crack. Then, a scene that left everyone dumbfounded appeared. One after another, fire elemental came out of the crack and rushed into the underground tomb without hesitation, activating the baking mode. There seemed to be no end to their numbers. From the appearance of the first ordinary fire elemental to the disappearance of the last fire elemental, it took a total of 10 minutes. At least 3,000 fire elemental were sent underground, leaving a sea of fire wherever they went. A large number of skeletons, zombies, and ghouls did not even have a chance to attack. In the blink of an eye, they were pushed to the ground by a few fire elementals, becoming part of the fuel. After all, even the most ordinary fire elementals had a body temperature of at least 1,000 to 1,500 degrees Celsius. Under such high temperatures, weapons would melt into molten iron in a matter of minutes, and human bones would be burned into ashes. Unless one could find the elemental core within the blazing fire elemental's body, it would be impossible to kill them with physical means. Angus finally heaved a sigh of relief when the entire interplanar passageway was completely fixed. He began to look at the image transmitted back from the magic mirror with a fervent gaze, his entire body trembling slightly. Powerful. It was simply too powerful. Hundreds of undead creatures blocked the underground passageway like a tide, but in front of the terrifying power of the fire elemental army, they could not even last for 2 to 3 minutes, directly turning into a pile of black charred paste. He was willing to bet that if this army was placed in Valence City, even if the pirates and underground guilds worked together, they would be wiped out in a matter of minutes. As a fundamental plane that had existed since the birth of the universe, the power of the elemental world was beyond imagination. Even if the demons and devils were currently engaged in what was known as the largest and longest blood war in the multiverse, it still could not compare to the power of the elemental world. Even though each elemental world only had one god, they had hundreds of princes whose power was comparable to the gods. The powerful ones, like Aesop and Decil, were no longer limited to the elements themselves, but had evolved to represent the essence of the universe. They could easily kill the weaker gods. Of course, the weaker ones are not bad either. At the very least, they were at the level of abyssal lords and devil dukes. They could wipe a large city of over 100,000 people off the map with a wave of their hand, not to mention the endless elemental armies under their command. According to the records of ancient books, there was once an arrogant demon lord in ancient times who tried to invade the wind elemental world. He wanted to use his evil thoughts to blaspheme one of the four great elements that supported the entire universe. In the end, before the wind elemental goddess could take action, he was pushed back by the wind elemental prince near the point of invasion, as well as his enormous army. Not only was he torn to pieces by the violent hurricane, even the abyss level he ruled was mercilessly destroyed, leaving it in a desolate state to this day. Sir, at this rate, the fire elemental army will reach the lowest level in at most 10 minutes. Do you intend to just watch as they burn Cecil to ashes? Angus hurriedly lowered his voice and reminded Leyland when he saw that the entire plan was going so smoothly. He did not want to waste all his effort, only to end up not being able to capture a single person alive. Andre shook his head with a smile. No, calm down, my friend. Haven't you noticed? So far, less than 1/3 of the magic traps in the passage have been triggered, which means that our enemies have already noticed our presence. They must be like spiders spreading their web, patiently waiting for us to appear. Angus subconsciously frowned and cursed in a low voice. Damn it, what a bunch of cunning bastards. So what do you intend to do? I don't intend to do anything. I'll just stay here and see how long they can last. According to the number of corpses buried in the cemetery in the uptown for hundreds of years, they can only summon about 5,000 undead creatures at most. Currently, nearly 1/3 of them have been used up. When another 1/3 is destroyed, regardless of whether we show up first, the enemy will not be able to help but reveal their trump card. With that, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a cold smile that sent chills down everyone's spine. In fact, at this moment, a large amount of EXP was refreshed in his vision. Although the skeletons killed by the fire elemental could only provide 15 to 20 EXP, they won in large quantities. In just 10 minutes, he had gained 20,000 EXP. He estimated that he could get more than 50,000 EXP from killing all of them. Since there was such a good opportunity to gain EXP, how could he let it go? Anyway, the distance from the entrance to the deepest part of the underground was only 500 meters. He could reach there with a short distance teleportation. He could still make it in time when the vampires appeared. Chapter 764. Someone once said that destruction was always easier than creation, especially when someone had great power. Often, a malicious thought could cause terrible consequences. The scene before his eyes was the best proof of that. Under the lead of the giant fire elemental general, Tavi, thousands of fire elementals rampaged through the underground tomb. They did not let go of any fork in the road or any dark corner. They used their scorching bodies to burn everything that could be burned. Even the gold and silver ornaments buried with the dead were turned into pools of liquid metal under the high temperature. Not knowing whether it was their nature or because they were too excited to come to the material world, Andre seemed to be able to feel the cries of these fire elementals from the depths of their souls through the elemental core in his chest. They were more than happy to set fire to the wooden coffins that had not yet rotted and burn the undead that blocked their way into charred corpses. Humans would probably never understand why burning made the elementals born from the flames so happy. In fact, mages had long since discovered the passion of fire elementals for burning. They had used this characteristic many times to destroy enemy cities or villages. However, they could not control it. They could only retreat immediately after completing the summoning and let the fire elementals do whatever they wanted. Usually, when mages chose to summon helpers, they would rarely choose to summon the fire, water, earth, and wind elementals. This was because they were not druids and had not signed any agreement with the elemental world. Every time they summoned, they needed to project their spirit into the world of the elemental to communicate. Once the communication failed, the summoned elementals would launch a violent attack on the summoner until the summoner was killed or the elementals themselves were destroyed. Who would summon a monster that wanted to kill them for no reason. Obviously, no mage in their right mind would do that. Compared to elementals that were prone to accidents, they were more willing to summon creatures from another world that would completely obey their orders. It could be said that in the entire continent, there was no one else like Andre who could make an entire army of fire elementals obey his orders. Therefore, every mage and apprentice present showed shock and fanaticism. In their view, since this young tower master had such great power, he was fully capable of conquering more regions. It was even possible for him to establish an empire in the southern region. One of the female mages who looked to be in her 40s gathered her courage and approached him. She carefully asked, "Honorable sir, may I ask, how do you plan to deal with this army of fire elementals?" "Handle it?" Andre looked away from the magic mirror and frowned subconsciously. He stared at the average-looking middle-aged woman, not quite understanding what she was trying to say. That's right. This was an ultimate power that could destroy all resistance. Although I don't know how you managed to make the fire elementals obey you. As long as you have it in your hands, you can sweep through the entire southern coast. Not a single city will be a match for us. Think about it. When you gather all the rich city-states together, you will definitely be qualified to be crowned king. Power, wealth, reputation, power. Everything that mortals pursue in their entire lives is already within your reach. The lowly me is willing to offer all my loyalty and become your capable helper. The female mage was like a fanatic who had lost her mind, speaking in a loud voice that was full of temptation. It seemed that if Andre did not take this opportunity to do something big, he would be letting down the gift of fate. In fact, it wasn't just her. Even the other mages and apprentices looked excited. It was obvious that they wanted to go all out. What was the purpose of people living? Perhaps the noble paladins would answer. To preach kindness, justice, fairness, and the law. Lunatics who worship demons would say, to spread chaos and evil, and to use bloody sacrifices to please their masters. As for the majority of ordinary people, it was nothing more than the pursuit of better material comforts, as well as superior power and status. What was easier to fulfill these desires than to rely on a powerful mage who also controlled an army of fire elementals? No one in the world was an idiot, especially the mages whose intelligence was generally higher than average. They knew very well what kind of person they could rely on to bring them benefits. Just like a proverb in Oraire, those who were talented would never lack followers and servants. They did not even need to look for them. As long as they showed their strength and potential, there would naturally be people who would take the initiative to join them. Looking at the pairs of eyes that were full of desire and ambition, Andre smiled. He turned around and asked the bald mage standing beside him, "Angus, do you think so too?" "No, sir, I don't think rapid expansion is a good idea. Although we now have destructive power, there are too few people we can trust. Just ruling the Sardinia Islands is a bit strenuous, and large-scale expansion will lead to all kinds of problems. I personally suggest that it is best to fight steadily and take control of the islands first, then slowly infiltrate the land. After all, not every city has a mage organization like Lincoln City, so we don't need to be too anxious." Angus glared fiercely at the low-level mages and apprentices who planned to join in the commotion, and gave a suggestion very calmly. As one of the few trusted aides who knew Andre's true identity and purpose, he would not be as hot-headed as these short-sighted idiots around him. Build an empire? They dare to think about it. Ever since the collapse of the huge empire that ruled the entire South, the nobles had set off thousands of battles in the past few hundred years, but in the end, no one was able to do so. As long as the territory exceeded a certain extent, it would immediately start to fall apart due to all kinds of problems. Even a ghost would not believe that there was no interference from some forces. In the bald mage's opinion, rather than starting a war rashly, it was better to honestly calm down and strengthen the power of the mage tower. When the number of spellcasters exceeded a certain level, it would be easy to expand outwards. That's right, there are still some among us who can keep a clear head. Remember Angus's words. As mages, your first consideration is not how to obtain power, but but to raise your own spellcasting level. After this army completes its mission, I will send them back to the fire elemental world, and no one will have any ideas about them. All right, this topic ends here. I'm going to capture a few captives now. All of you stay where you are, and report to me immediately if you find any suspicious signs. After saying this, Andre immediately buffed himself with mage armor and stone skin, and directly activated the teleportation ability of the ring, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 765. As soon as the main character left, a ferocious expression appeared on Angus's face. His eyes were like knives, fiercely sweeping through everyone present. After a full half a minute, he sneered and said sarcastically, "Not bad. You are really not bad. You actually dared to secretly join forces, intending to fight for power in front of the Tower Master. Is it because I have been too friendly to you? Or do you think that the Tower Master is still young, so you want to test whether he has enough wisdom to deal with these dirty and despicable matters?" As a Goral's mage who had participated in cruel political struggles, how could Angus not see the hidden meaning behind these little actions? But he never thought that these bastards would dare to ignore his existence. It was simply a slap in the face. After all, not long ago, he had promised Andre that the entire Mage Tower was under his control and that there would not be any accidents. But now, in just a few days, someone had begun to try to seize power. If it was anyone else, they would not be happy. The middle-aged female mage lowered her head in fear and carefully explained, "No, Master, you have misunderstood. We were just shocked by the power displayed by the Tower Master and want to take the initiative to offer our loyalty. We did not mean to challenge your position. Please do not be angry." Misunderstood? You think this is a misunderstanding? Do you think so too? Angus narrowed his eyes and glanced at everyone, his whole body emitting a terrifying aura. Without a doubt, he intended to use his powerful personal strength to suppress everyone's rebellious consciousness. Otherwise, how could he carry out daily management in the future? And how could he become the acting Tower Master? The magic released by a level 9 mage was enough to form a substantial spiritual pressure. In just a few seconds, some apprentices began to be unable to withstand it, and with a plop, they knelt on the ground. Their pupils rapidly contracted and dilated, and tears and snot flowed down uncontrollably. They looked very miserable. However, the bald mage did not have the slightest bit of pity. After confirming that their mental state was on the verge of collapse, he coldly threatened, "Speak. Who initiated the alliance first? Speak, and I will give him a chance to turn over a new leaf. But if you don't speak, then don't blame me for teaching you a lesson in the future." An elven scholar once said that humans were a race that could never be united. As long as the enemy released a little temptation, shameless traitors would immediately appear. Less than 2 minutes after the threat was issued, a 17 or 18-year-old apprentice suddenly raised his head. Suppressing the fear in his heart, he turned his head and looked at the middle-aged female mage. Then, he opened his mouth and asked, "My master, if I tell you who started the alliance first, will you forgive me and protect me?" "Of course, child. I will constantly pardon your sins, and will also provide you with the convenient conditions to become an official mage. Anyone who wants to harm you or make things difficult for you will become my enemy." Angus's lips curled up slightly as he gave his promise without hesitation. In fact, from the look in the apprentice's eyes just now, he already knew who was behind it. He just wanted to embarrass the other party. After all, there might still be room to maneuver if some things were resolved behind the scenes. But once it was exposed in public, regardless of whether it was the informant or the person involved, there would be an irreconcilable hatred left in their hearts. When the balance was in control in the future, then there would be no one in the entire Mage Tower who could go against Angus's authority. It's Lady Clara. She asked us to unite to fight for and protect our rights." The apprentice gathered his courage and pointed at the ashen-faced female mage, shouting loudly. He didn't realize at all how big of a mistake he had made by doing this. Angus cracked open his mouth, revealing a mouthful of white teeth, and immediately laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha! Do you see, my dear Clara, your little tricks are a long way from contending with me. Although I really want to give you a good lesson, considering that the Tower Master is in need of people, I will put on the account first. Remember, this is the first time, and also the last time. If I find that you can't control your ambition again, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Knowing that she had been utterly defeated, the female mage didn't try to quibble. Biting her lower lip, she placed one hand on her chest and bowed deeply. I understand. Please don't worry. I have learned my lesson. There won't be a next time. Very good. I hope you won't break your promise. Now, I will go down to help the Tower Master capture a few captives. All of you stay here and wait for orders. As for the punishment, everyone will be informed when we return to the Wizard Tower. You must be punished if you make a mistake. This is my rule, and also the rule of the Wizard Tower in the future. After saying that, Angus waved his hand and went straight into the entrance of the underground tomb. He was very clear that any spellcaster's organization couldn't avoid power struggles. What he needed to do was to keep up with Andre's footsteps as much as possible. This way, he would never have to worry about being replaced by anyone. At the same time, Andre, who had entered the depths of the tomb, was advancing slowly behind the fire elemental army. He was completely unaware that after he left, a power struggle had broken out above. Of course, even if he knew, he probably wouldn't interfere. Survival of the fittest was the law of nature. The weak would be eliminated, and only the strong could survive. If Angus couldn't even handle such a small matter, he would abandon him without hesitation and replace him with a new successor. Perhaps it sounded cruel and heartless, but this was the true way of thinking of a superior. If a useless person was allowed to stay in an important position, not only would he harm himself, but he would also be irresponsible to the entire organization. Through the dark vision, Andre advanced in the tunnel that emitted a burnt smell. Along the way, he saw a large number of unknown black objects. There was a small group of ghouls with tenacious vitality that were not completely dead yet. They could still let out a soft cry when they accidentally touched them. Just as he was about to take out his rapier to finish them off, he suddenly heard a slight rustling sound from the left tunnel, as if something was crawling on the ground. He didn't dare to be negligent and immediately summoned his magic pet, Small Eye. He instructed through the soul connection. Be careful and alert. Once you find traces of the enemy, attack immediately. Small Eye of Pearl shook its flexible stalks and quickly turned on a 360-degree surveillance mode. Even if it was a monster that crawled out from the soil, it would be discovered at the first moment. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Rustle, rustle, rustle. As he got closer to the target, the sound became clearer and clearer. Especially in the deathly silent environment, the sound made him feel uncomfortable all over. Goosebumps covered the surface of his skin in just a few seconds. Chapter 766. Damn it, what on earth is making that sound? It's even more inhumane than using fingernails to scratch on a blackboard. Andre gritted his teeth as he endured the physical discomfort. He really could not imagine what monsters or undead creatures could be hiding in the tunnel that had been plowed by the fire elemental army. Wherever the terrifyingly high-temperature flames passed, even the rats and insects hiding in the cave did not survive. Normally, there should not be any fish that escaped the net. However, just as he turned the corner, a sense of danger suddenly rose in his heart, and he immediately jumped back out of habit. But as soon as his feet left the ground, he suddenly saw a sharp white bone piercing out from the ground, directly hitting his chest. Fortunately, he had the double protection of the mage armor and the stoneskin spell. Otherwise, this would have been enough to pierce his heart and cause fatal damage. Of course, the current situation was not any better. Although the piercing damage was blocked, the huge force sent Andre flying. He slid back more than 10 meters and crashed heavily into the stone wall, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The bone that had succeeded in its sneak attack had no intention of stopping. It quickly dug up the soil that was buried in its body, revealing a hideous and terrifying body. This was a giant monster that was 4 meters tall and more than 2 meters wide. Its entire body was pieced together by countless bones. The bones were connected by dark red muscles. From afar, it gave off a feeling that it could fall apart at any time. But it was this nondescript thing that released an unparalleled sense of oppression, especially the 2 giant bones on its upper limbs. They were like sharp scythes, and even if it scratched hard rocks, it would leave deep marks. Andre did not doubt that if he was hit directly, even with the protection of the Stoneskin spell, he would be cut in 2. Without a doubt, this was one of the greatest masterpieces of necromancy magic, the skeletal golem. It was made up of the bones of more than a dozen medium or large creatures, and had been processed by special magic techniques. The hardness of the bones itself was not inferior to that of steel. Whether it was magic or physical resistance, it was outstanding. The most troublesome thing was that the skeletal golem itself had the characteristics of the undead, which meant that any form of negative energy or negative energy spells would have a healing effect on it. Seeing the giant magic golem rapidly approaching, Small I did not say a word. The main eye and all of the stalk eyes immediately began to gather energy, instantly shooting out a dazzling light. Among them, the scorching rays shot out by the main eye burned a huge hole in the skeletal golem's chest in just 1 second. The other eyes shot out freezing rays, freezing the lower limbs and the ground firmly to buy time for their masters. Cough. Cough, cough, cough. Andre, whose internal organs had been severely injured, laid on the ground, coughing and vomiting. The pain from his chest constantly stimulated his brain. There is no need to ask to know that he must have broken a few ribs. Without any hesitation, he took out a bottle of healing potion from his waist pouch and gulped it down. After the pain subsided a little, he immediately released the flesh puppet stored in his bracelet. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening noise, the Glubrizu puppet collided with the skeletal golem and began a crazy tussle. One of them was a perfect construct created through a series of complicated and strict casting processes, such as instruction, limited wish, telekinesis, corpse manipulation, animating items, and so on. The other was a simple version that used the arm of a secondary demon lord, coupled with the powerful regeneration ability of the trolls. If the former was compared to a Terminator that was extremely difficult to kill, then the latter was a clone monster with unlimited regeneration ability. In terms of pure combat power, the skeletal golem had the absolute advantage. After all, it was not a living body in nature. It did not need to eat, drink, or rest. The flesh puppet was even better. On the contrary, it was essentially a body after brain death and was controlled by the soul of the fire element. If the muscle fatigue reached the limit, then it would soon be defeated. Of course, it was not easy to make the body clone from the arm of secondary demon lord feel tired. Under normal circumstances, without 3 to 5 hours of high-intensity fighting, it was unlikely that it would feel any fatigue. Bang! Bang! Boom! The 2 behemoths, each more than 4 meters tall, were entangled in a fight in the narrow tomb. They kept hitting the walls and the ground, and a large amount of soil fell from their heads. Even from dozens of meters away, they could feel the strong tremors. They were using practical actions to prove that they were worthy of being called killing machines. Anyone who dared to approach would be torn to pieces by the waving claws or bone spurs not long after. Exciting, isn't it? These vampires really left me a big surprise, but it doesn't matter. I was fully prepared before coming. Muttering to himself, Andre wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and sneered as he took out the revolver hanging on his belt. When he came, he had already loaded it with 7 bullets with additional positive energy damage. He originally intended to keep them for the vampires, but now they came in handy in advance. After all, the skeletal demon statue itself had very strong resistance. Low-level spells could not cause any damage to it at all, and large-scale explosive spells, such as fireballs, could easily injure the flesh puppet by mistake. Therefore, bullets with strong penetrating power and a small killing range were the best choice. slowly raising the barrel that was glowing with silver light. Andre aimed at the muscles at the skeletal demon statue's knee joint and pulled the trigger without saying a word. The moment the hammer hit the primer, an imperceptible light flashed on the butt of the gun, and the wrist was lifted a few centimeters out of thin air. Bang! Accompanied by a loud noise, the copper bullet directly broke through the sound barrier under the double acceleration of gunpowder and magic, releasing a strong white light. Immediately after, it pierced through the air at a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye and accurately hit the muscles at the joint of the knee joint. The huge impact tore the fibrous connective tissue apart, and the released positive energy quickly nibbled away at the surrounding negative energy, causing the huge skeletal demon statue to slow down for a few seconds. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the flesh puppet pounced forward, grabbed the calf, and tore it forcefully. In a few moments, one of the calves was pulled off. At the same time, a row of values appeared in Andre's vision. Target hit. 25 points of penetrating damage to the skeletal demon statue, and 15 points of magic damage. Target's lower limbs are fractured, crippled. Note, although the fractured bones cannot be reconnected in a short period of time, they can still pose a certain threat. Chapter 767. A Threat. After reading all the information, Andre subconsciously glanced at the leg bone that had fallen beside him, trying to figure out how a bone could pose a threat to him. But he really didn't know until he saw it. He was shocked. The bone that was as thick as an adult seemed to have a life of its own. It quickly drilled into the ground and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Damn it, I suddenly have a bad feeling. Andre gritted his teeth and cursed. He hurriedly ran to a slightly more spacious area and stared at the ground around him. After the deep lesson a few minutes ago, he didn't think that the bone had drilled into the ground to escape. Facts had proven that no matter the situation, it was always right to be careful. Just as the flesh puppet was about to follow up with another attack, Andre suddenly felt a slight tremor under his feet. He didn't dare to be careless. He quickly ran into the distance, trying to use his speed to neutralize the attack from below the ground. After all, air resistance was always much smaller than soil. No matter how fast a bone could travel underground, it couldn't keep up with a human running at full speed. But unfortunately, the attack this time was completely different from the previous one. Dozens of identical thigh bones sprang up from the ground like bamboo shoots after the rain, firmly isolating the area within a radius of 10 meters, forming a solid bone prison. Looking at the cage that surrounded him, Andre was dumbfounded. He subconsciously poked it with his thin sword and found that its hardness was almost the same as steel. Unless he smashed it with a hammer, it was simply wishful thinking to destroy the internal structure. Unbelievable. Not only could this bone split and replicate itself, it could also ensure that it was exactly the same hardness. What happened to the conservation of matter? Where did the calcium needed for the splitting and replication process come from? As a series of unexplainable questions began to reverberate in his mind, Andre actually became distracted in the middle of the battle. Even though he was gradually getting used to not being able to use the knowledge he learned in his previous life to understand magic, the scene in front of him still had a huge impact on his inherent worldview. In a short moment, he was in a daze. Two black bats suddenly flew out of the vent above his head. They swooped down at a speed of more than 50 meters per second. With the advantage of their small size, they easily passed through the gaps between the bones and landed steadily on the ground. They quickly transformed and revealed their original appearance in the blink of an eye. Obviously, they were not real bats, but vampires who could transform into bats at will. After the two transformed, they immediately waved their sharp claws and attacked for both sides, trying to capture Andre before he could react. It had to be said that they had indeed chosen the perfect timing. If it had been an ordinary spellcaster, it would have been inevitable that they would have lost sight of one thing under the pincer attack. However, Andre had never been an ordinary mage. To be more precise, he had never relied too much on the power of arcane spells. Just as the two vampires stepped into the perimeter, he suddenly came back to his senses, raised his revolver, and pulled the trigger at one of the unlucky vampires. In the next second, bang, accompanied by a loud noise and sparks. The bullet, filled with positive energy, was like a hammer as it slammed into Vampire's chest. Vampire, who was completely unaware of the situation, only felt an indescribable force crash into his body, causing him to take a few steps back. He subconsciously lowered his head to take a look, only to discover that there was a fist-sized hole where his heart should have been. As for his heart, it had long been shattered into countless pieces of flesh. If not for the fact that vampires had tenacious vitality that was 10 times stronger than ordinary humans, he would have already become a corpse without consciousness. Of course, he only had a few seconds left to live, because the heart was the most important organ in a vampire's body. Once it was destroyed, it was very difficult to rely on one's own recovery ability to heal, not to mention that the wound was surrounded by a deadly positive energy. Kill him. Avenge me. On his deathbed, the vampire knew that he would not live and roared loudly at his comrade opposite him. No problem. I will suck the last drop of blood from this human for you. The other vampire's eyes were red, and he replied furiously. Looking at the enemy close at hand, Andre was not the least bit nervous. Instead, he laughed contemptuously. Suck the last drop of blood from my body? I really don't understand where you get your confidence from. Arrogant human, you will regret killing a noble member of the Blood Clan immediately. I will use the cruelest method to kill you, then resurrect you and turn you into a mindless puppet. The vampire, who was harboring deep hatred, had obviously abandoned his rationality. He did not notice that the surrounding temperature had begun to rise rapidly, especially the faintly discernible sparks, as if a monstrous flame could be set off at any time. Noble? Ha! I don't think a rat like you who can only live in the dark all day long. Where does your confidence come from? Andre used his thin sword to block the opponent's attack and sneered sarcastically. Perhaps vampires were indeed a relatively strong undead race, but this guy in front of him was really too weak before his transformation. He was probably only a little stronger than a normal person. With the standard of a level 3 rogue swordsman, Andre dealt with him effortlessly. Coupled with the agility and speed of the Johannes Sex Twilight swordsmanship, in just a few rounds, he left 6 half-inch deep wounds on the enemy's body. Ah, ha! Damn bastard! You dare to make fun of me! I will kill you! Kill you! As the wounds on his body continued to increase, the newborn vampire sensed Andre's contemptuous attitude. He completely gave up on defense, as if he had gone mad, attempting to exchange injuries for a life. Anyway, to a vampire, being pierced a few times was not fatal. A few mouthfuls of blood would allow him to recover to his original state. But unfortunately, some gaps could not be closed by risking one's life. The corner of Andre's mouth rose slightly, and a trace of undetectable playfulness flashed past his eyes. He suddenly raised his thin sword, and with a puff, pierced the ligament of the opponent's left shoulder. At the same time, with his left leg as the axis, he made a 180-degree turn, and his right leg was like a whip, ruthlessly kicking the hamstring. The vampire, who did not expect this move, instantly lost his balance and fell to the ground with a plop. As Aurere's battle techniques focused on the stability of the lower body, and his attacks were all dependent on the weapon in his hand, almost no one would use their legs to attack. But Andre understood that the strength of the legs was 3 to 6 times that of the arms. Many times, a kick could bring about unexpected results. Of course, it was different from the fancy kicks in the movies. His kicks would never exceed the knee. Otherwise, once the enemy grasped the opportunity, the consequences would be unimaginable. Chapter 768. The vampire who fell heavily to the ground was only a little dizzy, but he did not suffer any serious injuries. In order to avoid the possible follow-up attacks, he did not hesitate to turn his body into a gaseous state. Seeing the white mist appearing in front of him again, Andre immediately let out a cold laugh. He turned his hand that was holding the sword into an elemental state and held the mist in his hand. Idiot! Didn't your master warn you to never show your innate ability in front of mage again and again? Perhaps to a warrior or a thief, spiritualization is a difficult thing to deal with. But mages have thousands of ways to make you feel pain, even if you turn into a spirit. As these words came out of his mouth, the blazing flame on his palm suddenly rose up by a foot, directly enveloping the white mist. After just 2 seconds, be Astra's starred. I'm going to suck your blood dry. I'm going to tear your soul apart. The pitiful vampire could no longer endure the horrifying heat. He turned back from his spirit state and fell to the ground, desperately rolling and cursing, trying to reduce the intense pain he was suffering. The skin on his whole body had been burned red. If not for the negative energy protecting him, he would have been a charred corpse by now. Looking at the miserable state of his enemy, Andre extinguished the flame in his hand and pulled out the thin sword again. He said calmly, "Sorry, I'm afraid you can't do that." As soon as he finished his words, his sword was like a cold light, instantly piercing into the vampire's armpit. At the same time, his wrist flicked upwards and the thin, sharp blade cut through the cracks between the bones, easily cutting off the vampire's entire arm from his shoulder. Following that, he used the exact same method to amputate the other arm and 2 lower legs. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water. He didn't encounter the slightest bit of obstruction. Without a doubt, this was one of the ultimate techniques of the Twilight sword style of Johannes' school, Fischer. It was said that the master of swordsmanship, Johannes Richard Turner, had killed more than 5 digits of lives before he created this sword technique in his middle age. Only crazy killing could give him such a deep understanding of the joints of various creatures. If an ordinary warrior wanted to learn it, he would have to kill the enemy desperately and summarize the experience from actual combat. It was just like how medical progress required a large number of dissecting corpses. However, Andre obviously did not need to do that. The special power of the Eye of Arcane directly stored all of Johannes Richard Turner's experience in his brain. He could use any part of it at any time. This also meant that as long as his physical fitness was good enough, he could use any battle experience and skills freely after hearing it once. Although he could never cross the threshold of the legendary realm, it was enough to make 99% of the warriors feel envious, jealous, and hate. After doing all this, Andre lightly shook off the blood droplets on the thin sword. Without even looking at the enemy who had lost the ability to resist, he commented to himself, "Perfect killing swordsmanship. Nimble, swift, but not suitable for dealing with monsters with larger bodies." Johannes Richard Turner is indeed the strongest warrior in human history. To be able to create such a technique, it's no wonder so many people are eyeing his manuscript covetously. Although he was not used to close combat as a mage, he could more or less feel the power of the Twilight sword style. Moreover, as the saying went, there was no harm in having more skills. It was always good to have more power. The newborn vampire who had been played until he was crippled seemed to understand that he was about to follow in the footsteps of his companions. Thus, he glared with 2 scarlet eyes and cursed with a face full of hatred. "Human, don't be too proud. We are only the lowliest servants under our master's command. You may be able to kill me today, but you are definitely not a match for our master. Just wait and see. He will bring you extreme pain and despair." Is that so? That sounds terrifying. Tell me, who is your master? What is his purpose? Andre kicked the vampire's wound and asked nonchalantly. In fact, he was very clear that low-level vampires were mostly controlled by their creators. Not to mention betraying them, they would not even have the slightest bit of such thoughts. Thus, he did not plan on getting any useful information from the vampire. You don't deserve to know our master's name. Pray, human. Pray that our master won't find you too soon." As expected, the vampire who had lost his limbs was still stubborn. From his eyes, it could be seen that this fellow was completely unafraid of death, and even more unafraid of the possible torture that might follow. However, for a mage, there were many ways to obtain information. There was no need for the captive to speak. The corners of Andre's mouth curled up. He kept his weapon and immediately began to chant a spell. After a short few seconds, he completed the spell. He extended a finger and pressed it between the vampire's eyebrows. In an instant, a blurry image appeared in his mind. It was a male who was about 15 years old. He had long black hair, pale skin, and gentle facial features. He looked very short, less than 1.6 meters tall, but his whole body was emitting a strong negative energy. There was no need to ask to know that he was the master that the vampire spoke of. Obviously, this was a prophecy magic. Through some special medium, he could obtain information related to the target, although it was very easy to be disturbed. But under the premise of not alerting the other party, he could collect useful information. After obtaining the information he wanted, Andre did not hesitate. He immediately took out a wooden stake soaked in holy water and ruthlessly stabbed it into the captive's eye socket. Ah! The newborn vampire screamed as he struggled desperately. Not long after, he emitted a large amount of black smoke. When the last wisp of black smoke left his body, he completely turned into a pile of gray powder. Wooden stake dealt 100 points of magic damage to target. Due to attribute restriction, vampire is completely destroyed. You've received 500 experience points. As a row of information appeared on his retina, Andre knew that this vampire had been killed by him. There was no possibility of resurrection. He began to shift his attention to the two behemoths that were still engaged in a life-and-death struggle. Due to the lack of a leg, the skeletal golem had lost its ability to move. It could only lie on the ground, waving its eye-like upper limbs and cutting open wounds so deep that the bones could be seen. If it was a normal creature, it would have been cut into pieces by now. However, it was a pity that the flesh golem was not a normal creature. It had inherited the recovery ability of trolls and only needed a few seconds to heal its wounds. Therefore, if there was no external interference, it would be difficult to determine the victor between the two. Chapter 769. Asterisk bang. Boom. Bang. Asterisk. Watching the two giant golems fight with their fists on flesh and blood, Andre didn't feel the slightest bit of excitement. Instead, he felt rather bored. That's right. He was bored. Due to using elemental life forms with lower intelligence as the core of control, and the fact that they didn't feel pain, the golems didn't have any technique to speak of in battle. They simply relied on their height and weight advantage to raise their fists and smash downwards. If a normal person was hit head-on, they would immediately turn into a bloody patty. As for dodging, well, you couldn't expect a rock or iron lump that was generally more than 3 meters tall, or even 4 to 5 meters tall, and weighed tons to jump around like a monkey, not to mention that it didn't matter even if they were hit a few times. Of course, not all golems were so clumsy. For example, shade-steel golems that could completely hide themselves in the dark to launch sneak attacks, strangling golems that could strangle intruders to death or play with the art of binding, and gargoyles that disguised themselves as statues. They were all golems that could execute specific tactics. It was said that there was a powerful spell called Golem Activation, which could bestow souls on golems, allowing them to learn and think like humans. Unfortunately, these golems had very high requirements for the spellcaster. Usually, one had to be at least level 12 to be able to create them, and Golem Activation was a level 9 spell. Sigh. Just like the books say, the path of magic is long and arduous. I wonder when I'll be able to make these blockheads smarter. After complaining about the golem's intelligence, Andre immediately used the teleportation ring to escape from the bone prison. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Upon receiving the order, the flesh golem immediately punched the skeletal golem. Taking advantage of the fact that the golem had yet to react, it quickly retreated. In just a few seconds, it had successfully returned to its creator's side. Andre stretched his muscles and took out another fireball magic wand from his waist, muttering to himself, "The next two will be delightful explosions and barbecue time. Let me see how hard your bones are." After saying that, a small orange-yellow fireball shot out from the top of the ruby, ruthlessly hitting the skeletal golem and causing a violent explosion. Boom! However, a golem was a golem. Even the weakest golem couldn't be dealt with by mere 1 or 2 fireballs. Dragging its gigantic body, the skeletal demon golem stared at the flames and shock waves as it crawled rapidly on the ground. Other than the fact that its bones were slightly blackened, there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary. In reality, a rank 3 arcana spell that could easily turn a normal person into mincemeat had only dealt less than 5 points of damage to it. Most of the damage had been absorbed by the special magical materials that had been applied to the bones. It was far from enough to destroy it. All right, looks like 1 shot isn't enough. Let's have a few more. According to the theory of the Church of Fireball, there's nothing in the world that can't be solved by fireballs except fire elements. The only difference is whether you have enough fireballs and whether they're powerful enough. Andre recalled some of the strange sayings he had read in his previous life and smiled as he continued to shoot fireballs. Following a series of violent explosions, the components of the scales and the bones quickly became active. Not long after, a layer of light blue flames appeared on the skeletal demon golem. But even so, it still didn't lose its ability to move. Seeing that the gigantic skeleton was getting closer and closer to him, Andre had the flesh puppet beside him rush forward while he put away his magic wand. His hands danced quickly as he entered a spell-casting state. Having received the order, the flesh puppet didn't hesitate. It used its thick and strong claws to hold the skeletal demon golem in place. Even though the flames had already begun to burn its skin, it didn't let go. Taking advantage of these precious few seconds, Andre finally completed the spell at hand. He opened his arms and released a rank 4 spell, Ice Storm. In an instant, a large amount of fist-sized hailstones suddenly fell from the top of his head. They were fast and vicious. With him as the center, the area within a radius of 10 meters was completely covered. Crackling sounds could be heard continuously. Perhaps under normal circumstances, a mere ice storm wouldn't be enough to damage the bones that were harder than steel. But now, severe cracks began to appear on the skeletal demon golem that had been hit by the hailstones. The flesh puppet pulled harder, and a series of cracking sounds immediately rang out. Seeing the masterpiece of necromancy worth more than 100,000 gold coins being torn to pieces in front of him, Andre's face revealed a trace of amusement. He muttered softly, "I didn't expect that thermal expansion and contraction would work on a demon golem. It seems that magic isn't omnipotent." There was no doubt that the cracks on the skeletal demon golem's body did not appear randomly. They were first baked under the high temperature of the fireball, then cooled rapidly under the impact of the hailstones, forming a thermal contraction reaction. It was well known that bones were not benign conductors of heat. Therefore, when the inside expanded with heat and the outside contracted with cold, there would be a mutual repulsive force, causing the internal structure to change. Obviously, this very simple physical knowledge had a huge effect at this moment. If one wanted to completely destroy a skeletal demon golem with magic or physical attacks, it would probably take at least dozens of level 3 to level 5 spells, or at least 100 hits with a +2 enchanted weapon. But looking at it now, it had easily solved the problem with just a few fireballs and an ice storm. You have successfully destroyed a skeletal demon golem. You have received 5,000 EXP. This is the first construct you have destroyed with your own strength. You have been randomly rewarded with a magic item. Congratulations! You have received a pair of Sharana's white stockings. Looking at the information that quickly appeared in his retina, Andre suddenly felt something in his hand. He looked down and found that it was a pair of white garter stockings. As for whether it was for men or women, he wasn't too sure. But from the name Sharana, he personally preferred to use it for women. After all, in Oraire, stockings, high-heeled shoes, corsets, and other things were not exclusive to women. Many noble men would also wear them when attending grand banquets. It couldn't be helped. Whether it was on Earth or in this world full of supernatural powers, there There would always be a group of people who stood at the forefront of the so-called fashion trends. Their aesthetic standards were usually very strange, and they only wanted the strangest, not the most beautiful, so Andre had long been used to it. Of course, the enchantment of this pair of white stockings was still pretty good. It could increase the wearer's dexterity by 2 and increase their movement speed by 30%. Andre planned to give it to Chloe or Black Lily Bonnie when he got back. In any case, he would rather die than keep it for himself. It was too perverted. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.